Good morning. We're going to call this regular meeting of the Nags Head Board of Commissioners to order. If everybody will join me in a moment of silent meditation and prayer, and if you will keep in mind the families of Dare County Commissioner Richard Johnson and former Mayor Pro Tem Ronnie Scott, as we thank and also wish for a speedy recovery for Doug Romali, who underwent some surgery this past week. Amen. You'll join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thanks everybody for coming out on such a beautiful day today.
No kidding.
It is nice to see September, I confess. Our first item today is the adoption of the agenda.
Move to adopt as presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, like sign. Motion passes unanimously. The next item is audience response. This is the time that we set aside for the public to come and speak to the board. If you will come and give us your name and address. This is also an appropriate time. We have got some discussion of a change in our overlay district. This would be an appropriate time to comment on that. We will also have an additional public hearing possibly sometime in the future as well. Who would care to take the first crack?
My name is Mike Kelly. I live at 436 Villa Dunes Drive. I'm a resident of Nags Head for 41 years. Okay. I'm coming to talk about the commercial outdoor recreational overlay zoning district discussion, make a comment. There's not much comment you can make at the present time because there hasn't been much direction other than the fact that at last meeting, for some reason or another, a property that I have came into conversation. The conversation during the public comment session was prefaced by the fact it was a rumor. Given rumors at 6708 South Croatan Highway and 2316 South Croatan Highway, nobody is buying my property, okay? Nobody's developing, nobody's putting Whole Foods, food lines, whatever, condominiums, I don't know. All I do is go to work every day, okay? And we're still going to work tomorrow, and we're still making improvements to the property. We're still doing everything and we have a vested interest in doing those things. I do have a concern, though, that the agenda that was printed out last Wednesday, today was supposed to be a public hearing on the outdoor overlay zoning district, and the recommendation or the conversation that came out of the planning board from just a stated rumor as opposed to anyone doing any in-depth studying on the town's portion about what is beginning to happen within the town. And I think this is a very dangerous precedent if we begin to react to every rumor that comes up to the town, and especially in a public comment, and then all of a sudden we're going to begin to have public hearings over rumor and innuendo. So that's that portion of it. The other thing is that I've owned this property for 25 years. It was C2. It seems that in the mid-90s, there was a time when they didn't want to begin to have golf courses and Ferris wheels within the middle of residential sections, and the town thought other things should begin to happen. So the C2 zone in that area, in the Wellbone, north of Wellbone Junction on the Sound, became a recreational overlay district. And then as the town began to take all the commercial property and all the hotel zones including the Moongate area right now. When they moved the road, the beach road, so we could put a commercial, we could put a hotel. And the town's allowed one hotel now since 1985. So we made a hotel overlay district. So we got the commercial district, we put a recreational overlay district because we didn't want to do anything around in any of the other areas of the town. Now we got a hotel overlay district, and the property hasn't increased, and we're allowing small wind energy facilities in there too, so we were able to meet that demand. But it seems like we've got a whole lot of things that want to be used in a whole little bit of property over there. And all of a sudden, then beginning to make the consideration of going to 15,000 square feet for whatever. Given the rumor portion of the regulations, I believe it was Margaret Suppler that made the comments that you know, you don't have access, you have stormwater, you have other things that are, there was three things, I forgot the third one, that she mentioned in her comments, and I see the stormwater is on the agenda today. They are all part of the process. They're all part of what we're supposed to do every time I have developed or improved any commercial piece of property that I have. And likewise, any residential. There is a set agenda. There's a list, a laundry list of items that we have to address. The town has done a very good job to date keeping that laundry list and doing it, and I have no problem with it to date. But all of a sudden deciding to take a zone that's been sitting there for, if I've owned it for 25 years, I don't know how long it was there before that. And I think that it would probably be prudent for the town to begin to consider to take, I also own the Restaurant by George property, converted it into George's Junction. We took it out of bankruptcy. We ran it as a restaurant for about 7 or 8 years. The restaurant was so large and it had developed some mold problems, and during Hurricane Isabel, not only did the water come from the roof, it also came from the floor, and it just was going to be probably about a $600,000 to $800,000 solution. So we decided to take the 18 lots that were sitting underneath the property and begin to convert it to residential. That was welcomed by the town. I think if you ride by now, 17 out of 18 have been developed, probably more so than anything in the last 5 years in Nags Head. And also, but that if you go into the zoning maps, you'll see that that property is probably still zoned commercial. I think the town, now there are probably about 14 different property owners on those 18 lots. I doubt that that's a viable commercial site. I think the town, in conjunction with wanting to be restrictive on overlay districts for whatever reason, and the town actually is not an adjacent property owner, but a property owner within 125 feet of wanting to downzone a piece of property or make it less attractive, does set themselves in a very precarious, potentially precarious situation. The other thing is that we've eliminated so much commercial property within the town that this is a very serious type of thing. Also, the property that the town owns in conjunction with the Dare County Visitors Bureau was purchased for, it depends on who you talk to and how long you talk to, and whether it already had a preset idea of how it was going to be managed, how it was going to be developed in the future, improved upon. And they've had some recent meetings that have been trying to give direction on what to do with the property. That all remains to be seen, because it goes anywhere from a convention center hotel project to a public park. But that is another item. Is special event sites have been put in that zone also. That zone is just chock full of little things that it can be done over there. Probably more so than any zone left in the town. Anyway, it's something after the discussion today, we'll have more of a direction on where we're going to go, whether we're going to have a public hearing, what we're going to begin to do. I think the town needs to address how much commercial site they have and how much they want to put their big boy pants on and actually take these sites. They've allowed almost every hotel or potential hotel site within the town to be downzoned, and we've got to decide what we're going to do. As a business person, I think you can look at my properties and not begin to realize or not begin to think that we're trying to put concrete and develop and put a whole lot of development. I probably got more live oaks sitting on Kelly's Restaurant than any business in the town of Nags Head, and my people are allowed to trim them, they're not allowed to cut them. But the one thing is that we do need a balanced economic model within the town, and taking the potential people, visitors to the town, they like to have parks, they like to have vistas, but they also want to go shopping, and they want to begin to do other things that, and they have certain commercial needs. Balancing that is very, very important. And I have come to this board at least twice, if not 3 times, telling them that the short-term stay needs that the visiting community, Nags Head is a tourist destination. There's no doubt about that. That would be agreed upon by everybody. But we have very few short-term stays. We've developed into a residential cottage industry. Our property management, our cottage industry has done gangbusters, has done a great job, and many members on this board are heavily involved in that at the present time. However, we are in dire need, in my opinion. Of course, I'm just one person, and there are probably another couple thousand voters in Nags Head that would decide that we do need another hotel that can begin to make us competitive and have people come to Nags Head as opposed to the cottage industry, which today or tomorrow isn't going to begin to hurt us, but over the next 10 to 20 years, we'll begin to see a marked difference of the visitors that we have. We have done a great job with beach nourishment, and this council took political leadership in beach nourishment when they were told no in a popular vote, and came around and went against our popular vote and pushed for beach nourishment otherwise. And I think that at present, we're all patting ourselves on the back for how smart we are. And so thank you very much for doing that. And after today's discussion, we'll have more of a direction on where we're going to go with the outdoor recreational zoning district, hotel overlay district, small wind energy facility, commercial C2 zone. Okay. If you have any questions about how I feel, you're welcome to give me a call at 252-202-4116. I take text, I do email. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Pat Heathen, and I live in Kill Devil Hills. Excuse me. I have 2 oceanfront cottages, 18.5 mile in Nags Head. And my concern is bulkheads. I have a beautiful double bulkhead with the help of Mother Nature. However, my neighbor to the north has no bulkhead. So when we had Hurricane Sandy last year, or whenever it was, the water came up and went right down his driveway. And before it did that, it took an awful lot of my sand on the north side, as well as sand on his north side. He refuses to do anything about putting up some sand fence and creating a bulkhead, which the Mother Nature does that. It's a no-brainer. Anyway, I'm wondering if, seeing how I'm guessing 95% of the homeowners on the Outer Banks have sand fences and have dunes that keep the water where it's supposed to be, whether or not we could make some rules about every homeowner needs to have a good-sized bulkhead to keep the ocean off of the highway. I'm sure that we could eliminate those huge puddles that are there after a storm, and that would be a good idea. And that's about it.
Thank you, ma'am. Just for everybody's information, we don't generally respond to the comments at the time that we get the comments, but we do think about them. I'm not sure on your terminology, however, bulkheads on the ocean front are prohibited all through the state of North Carolina. So you may be thinking about dunes, and I think we agree with you on building dunes. Anybody else care to speak? Yes, sir.
Good morning. I'm Richard Murphy, 8817 South Old Oregon Inlet Road. As we fastly approach the upcoming election, it's imminent that the landscape or complexion of the Board of Commissioners in Nags Head is going to take a change one way or the other. I too, as each of you know, have always supported beach nourishment for the last 17 years. And just like Mike Kelly said, you know, a lot of people said no. You guys stayed on track. It's been a huge success. I've had a tremendous number of comments from people that have gone to Eastern Shore in Maryland, New Jersey. They've come down here, and everybody's comment is the beach is just fantastic. So it's been a huge success with the change in the Board of Commissioners. Let's hope that we stay on track. We've got a nice group of candidates, but let's see that we stay on track and keep the financing in place so that in the event that we do need to renourish, we'll have that available to us. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else care to comment to the board this morning? Anyone at all? Okay, we're going to close our public comment session. And our next item is recognition. Chief? Deputy Chief? You're on.
Morning, Mayor, Commissioners. This morning, I'd like to bring forth and recognize Hayden Pullen. Hayden is a firefighter EMT with the town, and he has been one for 5 years. Hayden resides in Currituck, where he lives with his wife of Tara for 3 years. She's also in public safety, as she is a police officer in the town of Duck. Hayden has 2 children. Hayden has also been in the firefighter and the fire service for 14 years. And it's in his blood. He's a firefighter here, and he volunteers in Currituck and in Duck as well, where he is also an officer in those departments. For the town, he serves as a firefighter, a driver-operator, and an acting company officer on an as-needed basis. And he's also a level 1 fire inspector enforcing the fire code. He's very active in training. He assists in numerous burns and so forth, and keeps his training up to date. And in his off time, he enjoys boating and spending time with his family. And he's a very good asset to us, and we're proud to have him.
Hayden, good morning. We've got a nice cross pin, actually, in recognition of your 5 years. Thank you very much. We all hope that it will be 25 years. I hope so too. Thank you very much, sir. Congratulations.
Congratulations. Good job. Thank you so much.
Our next item this morning is the consent agenda.
I have an item I'd like to correct on that.
Yes, ma'am.
In the minutes, so we can
So we
state
will
that.
pull
The
number
workshop
3.
minutes, number 3.
Motion to pull that item from the consent agenda.
What item was that?
number 3, the minutes.
The minutes,
She's got a
okay,
correction to the
okay.
minutes. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second?
Further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, like sign. And we'll consider that number 3 and
New business?
how about at the end of new business?
Fine.
Motion to approve the consent agenda as amended.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, like sign. Motion passes unanimously. Our first public hearing this morning is a public hearing to consider a conditional use vested right site plan amendment submitted by Albemarle and Associates on behalf of Hillco Limited. Mr. Leidy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At this time, we will begin the public hearing to consider this proposed site plan amendment. In this matter, I remind the board that you sit as it's a quasi-judicial proceeding, which means that the board's decision must be based on substantial and competent material evidence. Therefore, the evidence that's presented to you must be presented by sworn testimony. In order for you to take action, you must make various findings in support of your decision in this matter. I'll also point out to you that when a public body sits as a quasi-judicial panel to decide this kind of matter, it is imperative that no member be involved in deliberations who has a conflict whereby that person would potentially be something other than an impartial decision maker. Impermissible conflicts include, but are not limited to, a member having a fixed opinion prior to the hearing that is not subject to change, undisclosed ex parte communications, a close familial, business, or other associational relationship with anyone who is affected by the hearing, or a direct financial interest in the outcome of this hearing. Of course, previously undisclosed ex parte communications which have not caused you to develop a fixed opinion may be cured through disclosure of the facts or information obtained on the record. If any of the other situations are applicable to any of the members of this council, that member should be recused from participation in this hearing by vote of the remainder of the council. Do any of you have conflicts which would potentially make you something other than an impartial decision maker, or has anyone had undisclosed communication or information which you would like to disclose at this time? Okay. Then, in order to begin the proceedings here, I would ask that everyone who's going to present evidence in connection with this matter, if you please approach the town clerk so that you can take the oath.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Thank you.
All right, at this time, we'll begin the evidentiary presentation, beginning with the presentation of the staff's analysis by Kelly Wyatt.
Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners. Albemarle and Associates has submitted this conditional use vested right site plan amendment on behalf of Hillco Limited for renovations to the Colony Ridge Nursing and Rehabilitation Facility located at 430 West Health Center Drive. Specifically, they're requesting to add 1,373 square feet of waiting area and to relocate the portico shed, drive aisle, handicap parking spaces, and the dumpster pad. The property is located in the SED 80 Special Environmental District. Staff has reviewed the proposal and found compliance with lot coverage, building height, and parking. Architectural design is not required. However, the applicant has chosen not to install the dormers along the roof span as previously requested by the Colony Ridge Committee. No additional signage has been proposed. The minimal lighting revisions have been reviewed and approved by town staff. The Dare County Health Department has provided a letter of authorization for the proposed improvements. Stormwater and traffic circulation have been reviewed and approved by the town engineer. Additionally, the fire department and the public works department have reviewed and approved this request. As you may be aware, there was a lot of discussion regarding an internally or externally installed RPZ device, and there's been a lot of back and forth on that. So today we have David Ryan, the town engineer, here to update the board on the status of where we stand with the RPZ device. The planning board on July 16th voted unanimously to recommend approval of the request with the following conditions. Additional handicap parking spaces be designated, parking specifically for physical therapy and rehabilitation patients be allocated, to disallow facility vehicles to park in the designated spaces that we just noted, and to provide a vegetative buffer around the dumpster pad, and again, the dormers to break up the roof span. In a letter written by Hillco that's included in your packet, they have addressed the items noted by the planning board and have noted that they're choosing not to install those dormers because of structural issues associated with the new roof that's been placed on the building. Planning staff would recommend approval of the conditional use vested right site plan amendment. We have Mike Morway, Jay Overton from Albemarle here to answer any questions. Happy to answer any questions, and as I mentioned, Dave Ryan can address the RPZ.
All right, does the board have any questions for Ms. Wyatt? None? Does the applicant have any questions it wishes to ask Ms. Wyatt? All right, anything further at this time?
No, sir.
All right, thank you very much. All right, at this time, the applicant is welcome to present or make any presentation it wishes to present in support of this request.
Good morning. Thank you for having us here. I think Kelly did a good job in summarizing the overall scope of the project.
If you could please tell us your name, sir?
I'm sorry, my name is Mike Morway. I'm with Albemarle and Associates.
Okay.
This is a continuation of a project that's been going on. Most of the improvements that are associated with the project are internal to the building. There's very little changes that are proposed on the site. Everything that's been done so far has been internal to the building, and this really is a continuation to that. Obviously, there is an expansion of 1,320 square feet, I believe it is. That's associated with enhancing the lobby area, creating more of a lobby area there. We're bumping back the current entrance to give a little bit more room to make that happen, and then adding a new porte-cochere with some architectural features to that to help dress up. We're adding a walkway to allow access from the lobby area over to the rehabilitation area without having to go internal to the building, which has been issue to some of the functionality inside the building there. Other than shifting the parking lot, moving the dumpster pad, which is really a visual appearance, and shifting that drive aisle over, there's really nothing on the site, nothing of significance on the site that would happen. I'm available to answer any questions that you may have regarding.
All right, does the board have any questions for Mr. Maury?
I have one.
Commissioner Cahoon?
Is there any particular reason why the architectural features, as requested by the planning board, were not a consideration? There wasn't
They
really
were.
an explanation.
There was consideration towards that. They looked at that. There's two main reasons, as I understand it, as to why they're not moving forward with that. Part of which is the fact that the roof has been recently replaced, so pulling out part of the roof and putting in dormers and trying to blend in the shingles back certainly lends itself to the possibility of creating leaks in what's otherwise a roof in very good condition. And the other is obviously the cost associated with having that, and the focus of the project is really trying to create more of a functional and warm environment inside the building, and trying to create a better habitat for the residents and people who use the building.
And the only other question I have is, and it's on the site plan, I'm confused between Hillco Limited and Tar River LLC. Are they one and the same, or is Tar River leasing to Hillco? It's just I'm just confused as to who we're dealing with, Tar River or Hillco, or?
I believe they're one and the same. Hillco is who is managing the facility. I'm not sure where the entity Tar River actually comes into play. I believe Hillco is somewhat a subsidiary or something of them.
Okay, because it references Tar River LLC as on the site plan.
Hillco is the manager of the facility.
I thought it was Hillco.
I'm not sure. We could ask for further clarification. If you wanted to, you could continue the hearing in order to receive that information.
It's just a matter of, it says the leaseholder is Tar River, and everything I see is Hillco in the notes, and I just want to make sure that whatever approval we make is based on the correct ownership.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Morway? All right, if, anything further at this point?
Yes.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I believe Mr. Edwards had taken an oath, so
Ryan was going to talk to us.
or if y'all, well, we can ask you questions. If you see questions, you just call them up or ask them.
Good morning, Mayor Oates, Commissioners. Coming this morning wearing two hats. One as a member of the Town of Nags Head Nursing Home Committee, and the other one as my duties on the Planning Board. Just to explain why we have requested the dormers be placed on that roof. This facility needs some curb appeal with a resident population of that averages around 65 to 66 in a facility that has that is a 140-bed facility. We certainly need to have a better-looking nursing home there, and the entire intent was to give this facility better curb appeal than it currently has. So it's something that we can't demand, but we sure can suggest, and that's the extent to what we have done from both committees. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Edwards?
Yes. Bob, maybe you can answer the question, who are we dealing with here? Do you know?
I didn't hear you.
Commissioner Cahoon had asked earlier if it was Hillco or was it Tar
River.
LLC? You're on that committee and head of the planning board. Do you?
All of our communications have been with Hillco.
With Hillco?
Right. And Danny Kennedy works for Hillco, and she's the one that's been corresponding on all the correspondence and is the project manager. And as far as Tar River involvement, I do not know.
I think we could actually go back to the lease that we have with the group and get a definitive answer on that. We've got a lease, and I believe the lease is with Tar River, but I'm not sure. I think Hillco is probably the managing construction entity. Does that make sense?
Excuse me. According to the stormwater management narrative from June 27, 2013, it does specify that Hillco is the operator of the property. Also says that it is the lessee. I don't have the lease in front of me, but my recollection is that it is Hillco that is the lessee on the lease that the town has. As far as what Tar River's situation is, I'm not sure, unless that was a prior entity that may have been involved in the ownership at some point. I'm not sure, but of this facility.
I just want to make sure that we're giving approval or disapproving to the proper authorities. He just went out, maybe he's found out.
Did Mr. Ryan have something he was going to present on this matter? If so, this is an opportunity.
Yes, good morning, Mayor, Board of Commissioners. This is in respect to the RPZ assembly, which is essentially the backflow device for the public water supply on the fire line side of this. The approval should be conditional upon those provisions within the North Carolina State Building Code, North Carolina State Plumbing Code, Fire Code, Public Water Supply, and manufacturers' recommended installations being met for the installation of this device. And that would all occur prior to the issuance of a building permit.
So I think the The discussion has been between an internal RPZ and an external RPZ to the building?
That's correct. We're now looking at the internal option, and for the internal option, then yes, those provisions would have to be met.
And can those provisions be met with the internal RPZ?
Documentation has not been provided to the town in order to go ahead and make that determination, so that's why that should be conditioned upon this approval.
And I think you said conditioning upon manufacturers?
Recommended installation
Recommendations.
for that device. That was a recommendation from the public water supply section.
Where does the building code come in on it, I guess? That seems like that would be the ultimate authority. Does that make sense, the state building code?
Just because of the internal layout of that equipment room, is that there may be some building code provisions that may apply with that installation. So that's why I had gone ahead and mentioned that as a point of reference.
Mr. Cahoon, you have a question?
Is there currently an RPZ inside the building?
No, there is not.
Thank you.
Commissioner Sept?
David, I see that we've requested them to put it in the town's right-of-way, at the right-of-way, and they feel that internally is where they want to go,
That is correct.
and our concern is that there may be some cross-contamination with the water line. Is that what I'm hearing, if it's placed internally?
There, if installed correctly and operational, it can be installed internally.
Is the push not to put it in the right-of-way because of added expense?
That is correct.
Well, my last question is, I know the state's requiring the municipalities to comply with the cross-contamination control requirements. Would they be within those requirements if they installed it internally?
Yes, they would meet all state requirements if installed internally and installed correctly.
Any other questions for Mr. Ryan? Anything further, Dave?
No, that's it. Thank
All
you.
right, thank you. Anything further from staff on this matter? Anything at all? Does anybody else who's been sworn wish to comment on this matter or present any evidence on this proposal? Yes, sir. Or further information from the applicant?
Yes, we've got clarification on Valisi is actually Tar River. Hilco is doing business as Tar River as far as the operations of this facility. So the Valisi is correctly listed.
Thank you.
All right. Anything further at this point before we conclude the hearing, Mr. Maury? Anything further at all? All right. Does the board wish to receive any further evidence on this matter before it begins its deliberations? Yes, Commissioner Sadler.
I'd like to ask Kelly a question.
Yes, ma'am.
If I could.
Ms. Wyatt, if you could return.
Kelly, with all the recommendations that the planning board had made and planning staff had made, did I understand you to say that all of those had been accepted with the exception of the dormers?
Correct. In the letter from Hilco, I believe they stated that they did not feel there was a need for any additional handicap spaces. It was my understanding from the planning board meeting that was a request, but not necessarily conditioned. But they did go ahead and provide the vegetation around the dumpster. They have indicated that internally they will try to ensure that no facility vehicles park within the spaces allocated for the rehabilitation and therapy
Okay.
spaces. So,
Okay.
with the exception of dormers, everything has been addressed.
Okay, Great, thank you.
May I ask one other question of Kelly? Is there a requirement for a vegetative buffer around the dumpsters, or?
There was no requirement necessarily by the zoning ordinance, but the planning board had requested that buffering be placed there, just visually aesthetics as you come into the facility, to not see the back of the dumpster.
Any specific standard to that buffering? Couple of plants?
It was not set forth, 5 foot tall and 10 foot centers. We didn't go that far.
Thank you, ma'am.
Does the board wish to receive any further evidence before it begins its deliberations? Anything at all?
Public hearing?
I already offered,
I'm sorry.
if there's anyone who's taken the oath, but I will give one last opportunity, if there's anybody further who wants to comment. All right, if not, we will conclude the evidentiary presentation on this application, and the board may begin its deliberations. I will remind the board that in order to, if the board is inclined to accept this application and to allow it, you must make the required 3 findings of fact. If your desire is to impose conditions, then you need to specify those conditions, and if you decide to deny the application, you would need to state the reason for the denial.
What's the pleasure of the board? Anybody ready to start off? I will say that I'm glad to see it come forward. We signed a lease with Hilco or Tar River about 2 years ago, and they signed that lease in October 2 years ago. So it's been a long time coming, and I think we're all anxious to see this move forward.
I agree, Mayor, and I will say that while the dormers would certainly improve the curbside appeal, I can understand the applicant's desire to spend the monies in the areas inside where the resident may garner more pleasure rather than a dormer window. So and that's why I had Kelly come back up. If they have complied with all of the other requests that the committee has made, with the exception of the dormers, I feel that I'm satisfied with where we've gotten and wish we could have been here last year.
It's nice to see progress.
It is.
Well, I'll make a motion to approve this conditional use application, stating that the applicant has met the requirements of the Town of Nags Head zoning ordinance, subdivision ordinance, and other applicable ordinances, and that the use will not materially endanger the public health and safety if located where proposed and developed according to the plan as submitted, and the use as proposed will not overburden the firefighting capabilities and the municipal water supply capacity of the town. Conditions, I didn't hear any specific conditions other than the RPZ, but the RPZ is just saying that it's going to comply with the state regulations and the state building code, which I think they have an obligation to do anyway. The buffering around the dumpster, we didn't really give them a standard. So unless we are willing to say, okay, it's going to be a buffer yard C, I don't know that that's a meaningful condition either. So I'm going to make the motion without conditions. If anybody would care to amend, I'm certainly open to that.
I'll second your motion.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion?
The condition about the RPZ was that it meet the approval before a building permit was issued, would that be part of your motion? That it be approved before a building permit is issued?
Wouldn't it have to be approved before a building permit
Not
is issued?
necessarily.
Okay. I'd be happy to make that part of the motion.
The only reason I say that is because you could do other things, and then at the end you get stuck over an RPZ. And I just assume we not get stuck over anything, that we get this project moving on and get it done.
Yeah, I'll accept that. I think I can accept that as a friendly amendment, can I? Is that okay with the seconder?
I will accept that as a second friendly amendment.
Before any further action is taken, I just want to point out, I happen to have the page in front of me where the staff makes their recommendation, and and they list those conditions that were recommended by the planning board. I'll just go over this real quickly. One was to designate additional handicap parking spaces. One was to designate parking spaces specifically for physical therapy and rehabilitation patients. And one was to disallow facility vehicles to park in designated parking spaces as noted above. The other ones were the dumpster, as you mentioned, and the dormers on the roof. And the report provides that staff recommended the application be allowed with all of those conditions, although they do point out that the dormers couldn't be required. So I don't know if that makes any difference in the conditions that the board is inclined to consider, but if not, that's fine.
Well, and I think the way I looked at that was that the response back from Hilco is that they have the required handicap spots. I don't know that we would want to make them have additional handicap spots.
And you also heard from Kelly that they will try and keep the, Kelly, you help me out if I'm incorrect, that they will try to keep the facility-owned vehicles out of that area. And didn't I hear you say they are making a spot for the therapist?
Correct. They said that those were things they would do internally within the facility, is try to ensure that there are no facility vehicles parking in those spaces that they have agreed to allocate for therapy and rehabilitation patients. It's not specifically shown on the site plan which parking spaces those are, but they have said that it's their intent to do that.
Mr. Walters?
I understand the need to designate additional handicap parking spaces because having gone there for many years with my mom, staff often parks later in the evening in the handicap parking space in front. And that's because it's close to the building. It's not a well-lit parking lot, so I kind of understand that. So there may actually be need for additional parking spaces or not allow staff to park in the handicap parking space. And with the vehicles that are parked on this site, there are 2 vans that have been there for many years and they don't move, and they are at the very end toward where the physical therapy wing will be. So I'm sure that's probably what they're talking about. And the vegetative buffer around the dumpster, I personally feel that some type of vegetation is better than none because it is an unsightly thing, and I know they're going to move it, but currently, as soon as you drive up, you see the big dumpster. So I think some vegetation is better than no requirement at all. So.
Mayor. I like the planning board's recommendations. I support them, but I don't think we're going to have the staff to police it all the time. So if it's, why impose something if it's, unless somebody's going to be there to enforce it all the time, and I don't think we can do that.
Well, I think some of these are operational things, as they noted, and they've got to handle those things. We're not really going to be able to handle them on a site plan. And they did indicate agreement to putting vegetation around the dumpster. We just haven't specified, and when you don't provide the details, you don't always know what you're going to get, I guess. But there's not a requirement to do it either. Further discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, like sign. Motion passes unanimously. Congratulations, guys. Now, can we start construction tomorrow? We do wish you speedy getting a move on. Anything that we can do to help, we'll be glad to do. Thank y'all.
We will help dig around the dumpster to put the plantings.
Our next item is a public hearing to consider adoption of a zoning ordinance text amendment submitted by Gordon Marnes to amend the town code to allow a new use automated ice vending machine.
All right, this time we'll begin the public hearing to consider the proposed zoning ordinance text amendment to amend Town Code Section 48-377. And I'll point out that in this matter, the board sits as a legislative body. Therefore, the witnesses do not need to be sworn, and material and competent evidence is not required. But we will begin with the presentation of the staff's analysis by Kelly Wyatt.
Thank you. As you noted, the applicant here is Gordon Barnes. He's requesting that we add a new use to Town Code Section 48377, that use being automated ice vending machine structures, to be permitted as an accessory use to retail shopping centers within the C2 zoning district. The planning board, when they heard this request, they made a recommendation of denial based upon inconsistencies with the land use plan. Planning staff agrees with the planning board's recommendation. It did not appear that this type of structure would fit in with the Nags Head image. Based upon that, planning staff recommends denial as well. Mr. Barnes is not in attendance today. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Does the board have any questions for Ms. Wyatt? All right, anything further from planning staff on this?
No, sir.
All right, thank you, Ms. Wyatt. Anything from the planning board, sir? Does any member of the public wish to comment on this proposed zoning ordinance text amendment? Anyone? This is your opportunity to comment. Does the board wish to receive any further information on this matter before it begins deliberations? All right, if not, we will conclude the public hearing on this proposed zoning ordinance text amendment, and the board may begin its deliberations.
I'm sorry, I did have a question
Oh,
for
okay.
staff, if I
That's
may
fine.
go back for just a second.
Ms.
Right-
Wyatt, if you could come back up, please.
Beg your pardon. Page 3, the last paragraph before the planning board recommendation, it says the land use, talks about the land use plan. But the last sentence is recent denial of an additional vending cart request, board discussion indicating preference to bricks and mortar businesses, and past rejection of another ice vending machine request several years ago, indicates that this type of business is in fact consistent with the 2010 land use plan as currently understood and interpreted. Should that say inconsistent?
Typo. Inconsistent. I apologize.
Just wanted to make sure. It's the pleasure of the board. Comments even?
Mayor,
The board's already stated.
didn't we just go through this, was it 2 years ago? Has it been that long? Yeah. I'm just looking at the picture again, and Roberta doesn't have it on the screen, but I still feel the same way that I did 2 years ago, that it just is not, while I think Mr. Barnes has tried to do everything that he possibly can to make it more attractive this time around, it just, it doesn't fit into our character. It doesn't fulfill a need that is not already available, and it just is not Nags Head. It just isn't there. So I still feel the same way as I did before, and I can't support it.
And I agree. I'm a jobs kind of person. We talk about jobs.
It's no jobs.
And I think small businesses provide jobs, and I don't think an automated machine provides the jobs that I think somebody that's bricks and mortar does. So I'm not prepared to vote in a positive manner on this request.
I feel the same way.
Well, I don't really agree with y'all.
How shocking.
What?
I think the town is starting to meddle a little too much in the economics of small business, and I think small businesses would rather have government a little bit more off their backs than anything. I think my objections are more on the aesthetic grounds of it, rather than the carts and those kind of things. I tend to agree, though, that it just doesn't fit aesthetically more. But the economic piece of it, I would really ask us to try and be careful with that, because governments have interfered with business in a lot of ways and a lot of times, and it's usually not for the best. Entertain a motion to,
I make a motion that we deny the request.
we have a motion. Is there a second? I'll second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, like sign. The motion passes unanimously. That was a motion to deny. Our next item is a public hearing to consider adoption of proposed amendments to Town Code Chapter 34, Stormwater Management.
All right, at this time, we'll begin the public hearing to consider the adoption of proposed amendments to Town Code Chapter 34, which deals with stormwater management. Again, this is a matter in which the board sits as a legislative body. And we will begin with the presentation of the staff's analysis by Planning Director Elizabeth Teague.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, members of the Board of Commissioners, members of the public. In this effort by the Planning Board and staff, we have looked at actually 3 chapters of our town code in order to make sure that our ordinances are working together. I'm going to ask Ms. Thuman to put up a PowerPoint to walk you through this because it is a bit complicated, and apologize for some technical difficulties. We're working off of a handout. So in advance, if it goes a little bit slower, we'll try to move along. First of all, I wanted to start out with a great note of appreciation to the committee members who've participated in this process. We've worked over the past year to look at stormwater issues, to look at our local ordinances, and to look at development in the ground, what was working and what was not working. Of particular note, I want to say my appreciation for Andy Deal and David Ryan, who are engineers in the private sector when they started this process. Mr. Ryan has since joined the town staff, but it was really important for us in going through this process to have people from the development community and engineers who had tried to work with the existing ordinances and who had actually built stormwater plans and placed them in the ground and were monitoring existing projects. So we greatly appreciate their efforts. To the right-hand side of this, you'll see planning board reports. These are when the subcommittee actually reported out to the planning board. There was a good bit of work and documentation in each of those reports. We've attached for your reference all of those reports, and they're also available on the town website and as part of the public record. I will note that we did have a joint committee between the planning board and the Board of Commissioners where we sort of gave you a summary of all our findings and asked for your direction, let you know these are sort of the ideas we're looking at, and with your direction took from that meeting sort of marching orders, as you were, to develop an actual text and changes. If we could change. Thanks. So here are the goals of the ordinance update. This is important that we want to be clear about what we're trying to accomplish. And as the town sort of enters a new phase of development, we're recognizing that it's as much about redevelopment as new development. So we wanted to look at impacts of both development on sort of green fields, if you were, and redevelopment, which is the reuse of existing sites. In terms of addressing the ordinance, the sort of bottom line issue is how do we improve water quality or protect water quality and address water quantity, localized flooding. So it's important to keep both of those in mind, that this is both a water quality and a water quantity issue that we're trying to address. We're trying to promote what's called low-impact development approaches and ongoing maintenance to stormwater controls. Low-impact development is an emerging field. It's a natural approach, small-scale, lower-cost approach to capturing and treating stormwater on site. One of the key tenets of low-impact development is that you do a little bit in a lot of places, as opposed to creating one large stormwater catchment pond. So we're trying to introduce, also known as LID, approaches into our sort of method of operations here. And I will note that we're trying to also develop a best management practices manual that will be an easy guideline for people to use that will sort of give some ideas about low-impact development techniques that work well here in the Outer Banks. We're also trying to reduce the burden on town infrastructure. As everyone recognized last summer in particular, when we had a lot of rain, a lot of our roads experienced localized flooding and did not drain as we would have liked. Some of this is a maintenance issue, but a lot of it is an environmental issue, and another large part of it is the way we developed over time, where in many cases, particularly in older subdivisions that were platted out prior to any stormwater management rules, the default for capture of stormwater runoff from private lots and properties was the roadway. So we're sort of working in a situation where we have a town infrastructure that is overburdened. We recognize, excuse me, that these ordinances won't fix that problem, but we're trying to create a situation where we're not making it worse. So that's important to realize. And then obviously here on the Outer Banks and in Nags Head, we've worked very hard through our community rating systems program to be a model of floodplain management. We want to protect property. We want to keep people's floodplain insurance rate as low as possible. And so we wanted to make sure that our stormwater ordinance worked in concert with our local floodplain regulations. And finally, this is something that our planning board has worked, sort of an approach they've taken with every text amendment, which is we want to create regulations that work together. We're trying to create a cohesive approach in every update to our every text amendments. We're wanting them to be easier to understand, more clearly written, more concise. We want to make them clear to enforce, and we certainly want them to be feasible. We're trying, again, to balance these economic realities and to be pro-business based on the board's sort of goals that came out of your retreat. But at the same time, we're trying to make something that works within our environmental realities. And as always, we're trying to stay within our land use plan goals. The 2010 land use plan lays out a clear vision statement and goals for how we want to see the town move forward into the future. And ordinances are a large part of that in terms of governing how development is put in place. So those are the goals. That's the framework, if you would, that we started with. And again, the ordinances that are before you for a text amendment, Chapter 34 is actually a full replacement of that chapter. And in Chapter 28, we're making just a few text amendments to the soil erosion and sedimentation control ordinance for consistency, and then also with the zoning rules, which is Chapter 48. Now I'm going to start off with some basics because I think this is important review to understand the whys and hows of this ordinance. Stormwater runoff is precipitation that hits the surface and is shed. There's even runoff from undeveloped areas, but more typically a higher amount of runoff is created from impervious surfaces. That's rooftops, driveways, roads, parking lots. Here in the Outer Banks, we've been very fortunate in that our sandy soils absorb rainfall very efficiently. We are in an area where our soil types are very absorbent, and water, when it can get to the ground, can generally be absorbed and infiltrate very quickly into the groundwater. What happens when it isn't able to infiltrate is that runoff will pick up pollutants as it comes across a parking lot or a driveway. And if it's not able to be filtered through the soil or through some remediation management practice, it will get into our canals, into our surface water. And that's a concern particularly here for us because the ocean and the sound are very important economic resources and recreational resources. So it's important for us to to address upfront water pollution, and this is an attempt to do that. When a piece of property is disturbed, it's graded. When different materials are put into the soil, taking away that absorbency of our sandy soils, and when things are graded in such a way that water is not allowed to run off to certain areas, we end up with problems. We've changed how our natural topography handles stormwater. I've put up in the left-hand corner the water cycle. We all learned it in school, but it is important to just realize that we're part of a natural process. Rain falls, it hits the ground, and it's going to go somewhere. It will hopefully infiltrate through the ground into the groundwater and out to the oceans. It may flow directly into the oceans or sound. But there's nothing we can engineer that will ever change nature's cycle. So the best we can do is try to do as well as we can in terms of managing our impact on this cycle. Stormwater management generally tries to create localized approaches to capture, retain, and treat runoff. Best management practices, and you'll hear the term BMPs a lot, can control runoff by creating those systems of capture and treating pollutants. Next slide. So our goal here was to look at specifically what's going on in the Outer Banks and how can we create a template of best management practice for this town, for this community. You've seen this, we presented this in the joint meeting, but I think it is important too to show topographically what's happening with us. We have sea level, we're very close to sea level, but we also have some undulating areas. So it's not as simple as water running downhill. We have areas where water is trapped and has to infiltrate. At our highest point, you'll see that's essentially the top of the sand dunes. That's 60 feet above sea level. It goes down to an 8 to 9 foot above sea level sort of general area, and then there's another rise as you get to the second dune line on the ocean side. So keep that in mind because we don't have a situation where water is easily able to flow downhill and to an outfall. We have areas where we have to use our best engineering and try as hard as we can to give water every opportunity to infiltrate where it lands. If you would. Another very important concept to understand in terms of Nags Head is the depth of groundwater. I will just point out that these darker blue areas in here and a few spots along here is where your groundwater depth is less than a foot. This is actually from a study that was done for the decentralized wastewater management analysis in 2005. So you can see these dark blue and even the light blue areas where you have groundwater 2 to 4 feet below. It's important to realize that with the groundwater table being that high, we're limited in how much infiltration area we have for stormwater to sink down to. Couple that with septic systems and development, and you'll see that particularly in this northern area, it's really important to consider how development can occur with a groundwater table this high. Two conclusions that it's important to note while we're on this that the committee reached is, one, we wanted to approach this limiting fill. We even talked about a zero fill option. That was put on the table right away because that came up in the Board of Commissioners discussions. In this sort of scenario, unless you wanted to render lots undevelopable, fill was actually going to be necessary for construction. Part of this is just trying to create a stable construction level, but also because of our health department septic rules, where you have to create a separation between your septic system and your groundwater. Next slide, if you would. Another issue here in Nags Head that it's very important for people to keep in mind are our limited points of outfall. We have 12 points on sound side drainage and 9 points of discharge into surface waters. These are direct discharge points. I know people have seen and often commented on the discharge pipes going out into the ocean. These are part of a system that was put in place by the North Carolina Department of Transportation. They're designed to handle the runoff from DOT roads. We have actually tied into this system and created a drainage network throughout town that actually puts a very high burden on these outfalls, on these points of discharge. So again, using last summer as a great example of when a system can be overloaded, we were seeing a lot of backup because we had so much water and so few points of discharge. It should be noted that this is not necessarily a situation that we can change. We're working with DOT right now to improve outfalls where we can. We extended outfalls as part of the Beach Nourishment Project, and we're trying to work cooperatively with DOT to make sure we're maintaining our drainage ditches to our best of our ability. And we've also come up with some fairly creative projects to address particular stormwater issues at a neighborhood level. Back to floodplain management and regulations. Again, I can't emphasize enough how important it is for the town of Nags Head to have an active model floodplain management program. Probably everybody in this room, and certainly at the dais, has had to deal with the fallout of one storm or another. We are trying to move forward in our development regulations in a way that works with our federal floodplain management regulations and make sure that we are not just complying, but we're doing everything we can to get additional points within the community rating system to qualify our community for flood insurance discounts. We're expecting revised maps for our area sometime soon. The date keeps moving back, but probably by 2014 we'll have some revised draft maps. We're going to go through a process with this board and the community to look at those maps and update our floodplain management regulations. With stormwater, we wanted to get out in front to make sure the stormwater regulations were falling within the same context of our floodplain management regulations, and to make sure that we are addressing what occurs from a stormwater standpoint, flood hazard zone by flood hazard zone. So if you look on your floodplain map, you'll see different types of zones. And we wanted to do something that was consistent with any particular zone and not necessarily treat the ocean front, the V zone, similar to how you treat a more landward, inward zone, which is like the AE zone, recognizing that those zones function differently. We also wanted to make sure that we're addressing sort of shallow flooding and ocean overwash. In the existing ordinance, there was a strange provision, if you would, that I think it was well intentioned, but it said that new development had to accommodate ocean overwash, but it didn't give us specifics about what that meant or how to do it. So we recognize that we shouldn't have in our regulations something that we necessarily can't enforce or understand. We also wanted to look at shallow flooding where it occurs in these flat areas where it's trapped in that undulating landscape, and to try and create sort of a menu of management practices, if you would, that everyone could use to handle those types of situations. So next slide. In the process, we had lots of other issues that we discussed, and I'll just go through these really quickly because I want people to at least understand that we looked at these kinds of issues. Certainly, septic requirements and health department requirements were a key part of our discussion pertaining to fill. We looked at fill slopes at property lines where someone had used fill, but they had sloped the fill slope in such a way that the toe was actually on the boundary line, essentially creating an erosion line or a runoff line onto an adjacent piece of property. We looked at land disturbance not associated with a building permit, recognizing that this is an area where we are seeing some sedimentation problems. We looked at land disturbance less than 5,000 square feet. And the reason for the 5,000 square feet is in the existing sedimentation erosion control chapter, at 5,000 square feet, that's where you have to submit a sedimentation erosion control plan. Well, what we're finding is less than that, you still have some erosion control problems. We don't necessarily want to make people do additional work, but we need to find a way to handle those smaller areas of disturbance, particularly when we look at redevelopment. We looked at lot balancing, where someone's not necessarily importing fill, but grading on site, changing the grade and the topography and the drainage pattern of a lot. We looked again at alignment with floodplain management objectives. And another key point that we looked at is the issue of one private entity discharging water onto another. Again, using last summer as the example, because we had so much rain, we saw cases of people tying in their gutters and running a pipe to their neighbor's backyard. We saw instances of people cutting trenches into a neighbor. The town has worked with individual property owners to allow discharge onto the public right-of-way and to create sort of as much use of that public space for stormwater discharge as possible. We want to preserve that and keep that as the method of operation, but we want to avoid individual property owners sort of taking things into their own hands and then creating a problem for their neighbor. So we wanted to be clear about that. And we also wanted to look forward in terms of once somebody builds some type of management practice, having a system in place of maintenance and a way for the town to monitor it or enforce maintenance of a management practice, even though, say, something had been in place 5 or 10 years. We also identified several parking lot items. These are items that weren't necessarily appropriate for this topic, but we wanted to keep them in mind, and we're going to bring them back to you one way or the other. The architectural guidelines, the smaller building footprints, we recognize that we do have some narrow lots, and there is a provision in our architectural guidelines to sort of keep a ratio, and maybe we want to move away from that to allow people to maximize use of their side yards for stormwater management. We want to look at a cluster subdivision option. This is where you allow people to share things like their driveways, maybe their septic system, their parking areas to minimize impervious surface. And then what we're working on now is our parking ordinance updates. So those are things we're going to come back to you with over the course of the next year. Hopefully you'll understand and recognize the context and the amount of work that the background that's coming to you from. Finally, I did want to emphasize that we saw that there were a lot of non-regulatory projects and land conservation opportunities out there, and certainly some that the town is already pursuing. The Vista Colony project, Nags Head Acres. We actually had just got a report back from our professor at ECU who was doing sort of a survey of what can be done at a neighborhood level to handle localized flooding. So there's a lot of work outside of the regulations that we would like to see move forward and congratulate the town on pursuing. One particularly interesting one is this idea of identifying lots in existing subdivisions that have not yet been developed. And if they're in a low-lying area, perhaps they could be converted instead of a lot for sale and development into a lot for stormwater management. And that's something we'll certainly be working with you on in the future. Okay, so the actual ordinance itself, getting to the meat of the matter. In the work of the subcommittee, what they found is that the existing standards that are in place right now are actually working well for new commercial development and for new residential subdivision development. And the approach was, if it's not broken, don't fix it. In fact, last summer, because we had so much rain, it was a great opportunity to go out and look at commercial development. And you could tell the developments that were that were created under the stormwater ordinance versus the older ones that were created outside of this, prior to those ordinances being in place. Essentially, it's a 4.3-inch rainfall event that we're trying to capture and treat and hold on site. Generally, there's engineered stormwater management plans required as part of the development process and the building permits. FEMA regulations are in place and working well, and we see coming up in the parking ordinance some stormwater benefits that we can create with some slight changes in terms of curbing regulations and trying to create places within parking lots for stormwater to go. Residentially, in subdivision, it's a 1.5-inch rainfall event. Engineered stormwater management plans are required, and of course, you're still governed by FEMA regulations. So those were parts of the ordinance that we didn't change. However, you will see some changed wording in order to clarify and make it easier to read. Next. Where the committee found that standards were falling short was where we had individual residential lots and development going on to individual residential lots. And our purpose here was not to make it harder for someone to develop on an individual lot, but again, going back to that low-impact development idea, to ask everyone to do a little bit, to manage that amount of runoff that is created by the impervious surface that you've put onto an undeveloped spot. So what we did was we first started out with trying to limit the ordinance so that we're not unduly regulating people. And the first had to do with septic repair and lot investigation and surveying. We didn't want people to have to come in and get a permit if they need to repair their septic system. We want people to be able to handle that situation as quickly as possible. We also didn't want to prevent somebody from going onto a lot and clearing some land for a perk test or to put in a survey stake. But where we did want to ask for some stormwater planning was when people were in some part of that development process, particularly with a building permit. And what we did was keyed the requirements into fill. If you're not using fill, then there is no stormwater management plan storage requirement. Again, with our best management practices manual, we hope to have some great tips. We hope to encourage everyone to do a little bit on site, use a rain barrel, use a rain garden. But if you're not using fill, then it's just how the regulations are for you now. However, if you do bring up fill, if you are going to import fill, we're keying the amount of fill related to the floodplain zone. You can bring in up to 2 feet as long as you don't exceed the base flood elevation. You still are required, when you bring in fill, to capture that 1.5-inch volume that's created by your built-upon area. And we're recommending a 5-foot setback for the fill slope. So those are sort of the major changes. It's placing some regulatory requirements on individual residential lots, and it's keyed to fill. And the amount of allowable fill is reduced from the existing standard, where you could actually bring in up to 3 feet without any kind of stormwater planning at all. We've lowered that to 2 feet. And again, this is what's in the current ordinance. You can't exceed base flood elevation with your fill. What we're hoping is that people will move back towards a more coastal approach to development, building on short piles or on piles where during high water events, water has a place to go. It can actually flow under your house. So we're also requiring that maintenance of BMPs are required. We're going to ask for a maintenance plan to be turned in prior to the certificate of occupancy. We have strengthened language about directing water onto adjacent private property. We've put in some language there about maintaining the conveyance in the right-of-way. In other words, sort of with the public works and streets ordinances that we have in place, making sure that individual property owners don't go in and change the right-of-way conveyance within the town for DOT system. And we're also requiring sediment fencing at any disturbance near a property line. And this addresses that less than 5,000 square foot disturbance issue. So if somebody's going to get in and cut out a building pad or do some even preliminary land disturbance, we're going to ask them to get some permission to do that and put in some sediment fencing, even if it's not associated with a building permit. Then finally, a lot has happened in sort of the engineering field with stormwater management, and one of the more exciting areas is permeable technologies. There's all sorts of new pavers out there. Our existing zoning ordinances references turf stone. That's something commonly used, but that's by no means the only permeable technology out there. So we wanted to broaden our zoning ordinance to include all permeable technologies. But we also, at the same time, wanted to strengthen the town's ability to approve the technology within the application. And that's important because turf stone, while effective in most areas, maybe is not effective adjacent to a dune where all the holes are going to get filled in with sand. So we wanted to make sure that when somebody's using permeable technologies and getting counted on that for their stormwater management or for their lot coverage, that we are making sure it's appropriately installed. So, last. One other thing that was going on, I just wanted to bring to the attention of the board is our legislature had been batting around some regulations that limited a local government's ability to sort of go above and beyond what federal governments or state governments were already required in terms of environmental regulation. House Bill 74 was ratified and the governor actually signed it August 26th. Where the issue of stormwater came out was kind of an interesting paragraph in that bill. It's section 10.2 that says you can't enact an ordinance that regulates a field also regulated by state or federal statute unless the ordinance is approved by a unanimous vote of members present and voting. So it sort of gave local governments an out as long as there's consensus. And then it did give some specific clarifications upon definitions of built upon area and the use of gravel and swimming pools. And what it says in the state rules is that you can't, for the surface area of a swimming pool, you can't count that as built upon area. That's not where stormwater is going to run off. We concurred with that, so we've updated our definitions in the ordinance. In terms of gravel, the town committee sort of made a distinction between gravel that people are driving on that becomes compacted and therefore does not remain pervious, and gravel that's used like in landscaping. And when it's just white stone washed and it's not being driven upon, we agree with the state that in fact water can't infiltrate. So we updated our definitions in the ordinance draft that you see before you for built upon area and the use of gravel in swimming pools. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Question? Yes, ma'am?
Yes. Elizabeth, what did you say about the built-upon area definition, not the gravel part of it, but prior to that?
In the state rules, and this actually will change how the Department of Environment and Natural Resources is using their definitions, looks at gravel and swimming pools differently than previous times. And the difference is this. No longer is a swimming pool surface area considered part of built-upon area. The thought is rain falls into a swimming pool, it's not running off. Then with the use of gravel, the state felt like, I guess the legislature felt like when somebody's using gravel, that should count as pervious surface. But what we found over time is if gravel is used in a driveway and it becomes compacted, it becomes just like concrete. It doesn't allow water to infiltrate. So in our local ordinance, we've made a distinction between compacted gravel and non-compacted gravel.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So the ordinance that's before you, if it's voted on unanimously by this board, should not be counter to the legislature. And that's the important thing to keep in mind, is that we're really trying to be as consistent with our state guidelines and state rules as we possibly can. Other questions?
Any other questions for Ms. Teague?
Mr. Leidy, I did have just one final comment. In your staff report, you'll see that staff would support, if you wanted, I know we're throwing a lot of information at you. It's a very long ordinance. We would certainly support if you wanted to table taking action on this to allow the public and others at least 30 days for additional review, and we could bring it back to you in October. That's an option. I've had a chance to meet with some representatives of the home builders. They brought up sort of 3 specific items that they were concerned about, not necessarily in intent or content, but how they were written. So those are some phrases we can go back and strengthen as we need to, and I've conferred with Mr. Ryan and Mr. Deal on that process, and I think there's ways we can meet those needs. But just to throw that out to you, we've been working so hard on this. We don't want to rush through something and not have everyone on board or understanding what we're doing.
But as Ms. Teague requested, the board can table this action on this matter for a reasonable time, which might be up to 90 days.
Can you share what those specific concerns were?
I can. Let's see, if we go back to the 6th slide, maybe if you zoomed out, where it says revised standards. The home builders, actually Mr. Overton, who's here in the audience, gave us some really good specific feedback, I thought. The first was there's a reference to who can prepare a stormwater plan on page 12 of your ordinance there. And when it referenced back to those standards, there's not really something that says anybody can make one of these plans. It sort of assumes that when appropriate, an engineer might do it, but when not necessary, a homeowner may be able to do it using our stormwater ordinance, our stormwater manual. So we can make that clear. Secondly, there on page 10, paragraph 2, he looked at, there's a line in there about the infiltration rates of soils, and the concern was an individual property owner isn't going to understand what that means. Most of our soils have that infiltration rate. That's, I think, about 95%, if I'm not mistaken, of Nags Head has that soil infiltration rate. The key thing there is we're trying to get to a 5-day drawdown. Someone captures stormwater, it's designed in a way through a rain garden or catchment area that it doesn't just stand indefinitely. There's a place and a system in place for that water to infiltrate. So that can be something we can look at. Of course, this is something in our local manual we were hoping to address. So I guess whether it's something we change in our legislation or not, it's something we're definitely going to address in our manual for public usage. The 5-foot setback, the third thing that the home builders were interested in is on page 10 there, paragraph 7, where it talks about you can't grade your lot in such a way that you impact drainage onto another person's lot. The intent was not to grade your lot in such a way that you're draining your stormwater onto your neighbor. And we can strengthen that language somewhat. I think, if I'm not mistaken, home builders thought that might be too broad, so we can work on that as well. I see that there's some of them here today, and they may have some additional comments that they've thought of since we've met. But those were 3 that I captured from meeting with them. I thought they were well thought out and certainly easily addressed, given some time.
Did y'all consider the situation, which I think is probably happening more and more, where a vacant lot has been accepting stormwater from neighboring properties? Are we looking at that, if they start to raise their lot up to the same level, are we looking at that as being the same as sending that water back to where it came from, or? That's a tough one for me.
And that's a tough one for a lot of us. When a lot is platted, there is a development right that's assumed with that platted lot. But as these subdivisions become more and more built out, the lots that are the last ones to be developed are generally the low-lying lots. And by default, they capture that stormwater. They weren't designed that way. And if someone wanted to buy and build on that lot, they have a right to bring in the fill that they need and to change the drainage on that lot to allow that lot to be built upon. So this was a way of saying, okay, if you end up with one of those lots and you need to bring in fill and you need to change how the drainage works on that lot, we're going to ask you to do it in such a way so that you're not negatively impacting your neighbors. Instead, you're sort of draining towards the right-of-way or creating a low spot on your land that will allow that stormwater to capture what you're putting in to it. There's an interesting thing that's happening is I think neighbors assume that undeveloped lots are there to capture stormwater. And then they get upset when someone decides to build on it, right? So that's an issue where we're trying to keep that vested right to that plat, but to create a mechanism for people to do things sensitively. The second thing I'll note on that is this is one area, too, where we feel like outside of regulations there's an opportunity. Because truly there are some lots that we've identified in subdivisions that may have a very valid purpose in being bought, just purchased for stormwater catchment. Take them out of the development arena altogether. That's, obviously that's something we're going to have to work more on. I know Mr. Ryan gave me a list a while back about 5 specific lots in different subdivisions that could lend themselves to that opportunity. So that's something we'd like to see pursued. But, yeah. Yes, sir.
Other questions, Commissioner Cahoon?
It's an overwhelming document. I applaud all the work that everybody's done, and I'm not sure I've been able to absorb it all since we got our agenda packet, but I've been trying. But on page 12, item B, and it talks about fill, can you just explain a little more in depth about that particular statement?
Let's see. You're on section 34-8, Stormwater Management Plan, or section 34-7, Residential Subdivisions, paragraph B?
34-4.
Oh, okay, excuse me. My numbering is different. Okay.
34-4, and it's, at the bottom of it says page 12. So I guess it's page 75 of 200 and some pages.
I was going to say it is not.
How's that?
Can you give me the paragraph and the sub?
It's 34-4, and it's item B.
Okay. Duties of the Stormwater Administrator?
No, it's, let's see. Standards regarding the use of fill, and it's, A is crossed out, and there's a new A, and then there's item B, and it talks about fill in V zones.
Can we pull that up? Is there a way, Roberta? It seems like my pagination is different from what's in the packet.
Yeah, we are laboring with some technical difficulties on the town server, so we're not quite as, it's a little more manual today than
It's
sometimes.
one sentence that says, "Fill shall not be used in V zones as designated on the flood insurance rate maps or as allowed by FEMA guidance."
Yeah, let's put this up here.
Well, it says it's 75, 124.
Apologize. Commissioner Cahoon, I'm having trouble finding specifically where you're referring to. I apologize.
That's all right.
I've got it.
That's okay.
Okay.
It's a pretty long document to fill.
Yeah. Well, and our...
And I know we've been having server issues for the past few days.
Yeah.
No, that's not it. It's,
Okay, the part you're actually looking at is a section, this is from the current ordinance, and that's something that's been changed. I think you may be referring to the wrong document there. Let me
well,
back you up. Yeah, I guess we have created revisions to that point. The document that's under consideration today should have a footer that says ordinance draft for Board of Commissioners review, September 4th.
so should I be looking in this book rather than on my agenda packet? That's all I'm,
Yeah.
if so, tell me where to find it.
It appears that we may have downloaded a previous version of the ordinance draft, and some of the sections have changed.
So I read the wrong thing. So I've spent 4 days reading the wrong thing.
You're not going to be too far off.
Let us review this again, because Doug needs to sit. And so, no.
It's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
Well, you can do it. Midnight.
It appears that may have...
If I need to reread and come back with new questions, I will, but.
Okay. It appears
Heads up.
that what had been posted on the website was different than what was in the original packet that we couldn't print out for you last week. That's what I got right here. Yeah, this is the one you should...
So a heads up would have been nice. A heads up. Huh? Sounds like I wasted my weekend. That's why I'm
I see what this is. Attached in your draft packet is a series of minutes from the subcommittee, and included in that is one of the versions of the ordinance that's a markup copy, and that's what that is. If you continue flipping through, you should actually reach the ordinance that has that footer.
I did, but I wanted that particular item explained.
Okay,
That's
I'm sorry.
what my question
now I'm
was.
with you. Okay. In that markup copy, John, do you mind if I keep this just a second? Okay. Yes. And this is, again, a previous ordinance. What we were looking at is this idea of fill in the V-zone, and again, trying to limit the amount of fill that we allow in our V-zones in order to be compliant with floodplain regulations, specifically something that's called Technical Bulletin Number 5 of FEMA. And in that regulation, it's sort of it's actually an interpretive document that floodplain administrators use, where the FEMA rules allow you to bring in up to 2 feet of fill in the V-zone at the approval of the floodplain administrator, as long as, one, you're not creating impact on an adjacent property. And to prove that, the floodplain administrator can ask for a no-impact study. So what we are trying to do is create that regulation within the V-zone where we were being consistent in terms of how we allowed fill with what's allowed in FEMA Technical Bulletin Number 5. Where the Planning Board Subcommittee recommends is to allow that, but to limit the percentage of the lot that can be used. In other words, the intent of technical bulletin was to allow things like landscaping, to allow you to bring in your driveway and slope it just so, and to create certain lot sort of improvements that didn't necessarily mean filling the lot up to 2 feet. And so what the planning board did was we created sort of a limitation of percentage for up to that 2 feet of fill that you can use in the V zone. So that's, excuse me for the confusion, but if you end up going to the ordinance that's under discussion now, if you flip through this big packet of material, yeah, you'll see Section 34-4 in the ordinance under consideration became the administrative portion of what we were looking at. And the rules related to V zones are there, found on page 11 as part of Section 34-6, General Standards for Residential or Duplex Development on Individual Lots. Just to let you know where we ended up is standards for depth and elevation of fill. Any residential or duplex development which utilizes fill shall be limited to the following standards according to the zone as designated on the most recent flood insurance rate map. Within the oceanfront V zone, fill is addition of landscape fill, and that's what technical bulletin specifically, number 5 specifically addresses. No, that was right. You can keep it. Is permitted up to 2 feet above the pre-development surface grade or up to base flood elevation, whichever is lower, and the fill footprint may not exceed 10% of the lot area. Then we also, and that excludes the footprint of the active drain field and septic system as approved by the health department. We have lot areas defined as that portion of the lot landward of the first line of stable vegetation as defined by CAMA, and that all grading and fill activities must comply with guidance provided in technical bulletin number 5. So you can see actually the work of the committee and working with the ordinance previously. We did a lot of crossing out, rethinking, rewording, and this is where we ended up with in terms of fill allowed in the oceanfront B zone. Sorry. Does that answer your question, Commissioner Coons?
I think.
Okay.
Thank you.
But you're still going to allow higher fill in that area with a stormwater management plan. Is that correct, in the V zone?
No, you can only come up to the BFE or up to that 2-foot allowance. And again, that's aligning our regulations with FEMA policies.
Well, I'm reading in the V zone, it says, any use of fill exceeding 2 foot above the pre-development surface grade shall require an engineered stormwater management plan.
That's in the estuarine V zone, which is the next section. And it was important for us to recognize the difference between the oceanfront V zone and the estuarine V zone. And the difference, there's several key differences for everyone to recognize. One is wave action. And a lot of the technical bulletin 5 policies are there because what they don't want to have happen is for fill to accelerate waves or deflect waves in a way which is damaging to adjacent properties. And in the sound side, unless we have a hurricane, we don't have that same kind of wave action. So the estuarine V zone actually has some different guidelines associated with it. The second thing we recognized is that the soil type is different. In the estuarine, you'll get that sort of that peat base. Mm-hmm. You'll get a higher level of capture of water and not as much infiltration as you would with the sandy oceanfront. So we did recognize that you needed to allow fill in the estuarine zone more frequently than you would in the ocean V zone. Secondly, we recognize the fact that bulkheads are something that you can do in the estuary side, and they're not allowed in the ocean side by CAMA. So we created sort of a different level of regulation here, and this is where any use of fill exceeding the 2 feet above the pre-development surface because we're recognizing that in the estuarine side of the island, you will need to use fill. But we're going to ask you to have that engineered stormwater plan when you're bringing in more than that 2 feet.
Okay. Good explanation. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Other questions? John, do you, excuse me, Mr. Leidy?
Looking at the V-zone again, if you have a lot that is 4 foot below base flood, you would be able to bring it up 2 feet with fill, but then you would have to use pilings to raise it up to base flood. Is that correct?
Correct.
You couldn't put 4 feet
Correct.
of fill to bring it to base flood.
Well, you could bring, I don't know that we have any lots like that, but if you did, you could bring in fill beyond 2 feet, but you're going to have to do an engineered stormwater plan. And you can't exceed, under any conditions, base fill elevation.
But, I mean, this says you're permitted up to 2 feet above pre-development surface grade or base flood, whichever is lower.
Right, in the, which
This is the
zone are you?
V-zone, oceanfront V-zone.
Right, and the oceanfront V zone, again, is where we are trying to limit fill. So you're correct. And in fact, I was speaking in other zones, the estuarine zone or something that's not the oceanfront V zone.
You're allowed to come up to base flood in all the other zones except for the oceanfront V-zone, is that?
Correct, correct.
So there you have to make up your height with pilings, I would assume.
Yes, and the idea with short piles is we want to create that passageway for water when it happens, because we will have, in certain places, ocean overwash, and we recognize that. So.
Any other questions for Ms. Teague? Do you have other information from staff that you wish to present on this, or from Mr. Deal, so that he stood at one point?
Yeah, let me turn it over. They probably can correct anything I may have misstated or add to something I missed. Andy or David? Thanks. Thank you. Please do correct if I misstated something.
It wasn't a misstatement. I just, one added piece of information. The question had come up about the existing low-lying lot, that everything's been developed around it and the water's just naturally going there right today, and how do we deal with that? And as Elizabeth had said, they still have development rights. And one of the thoughts in the 5-foot fill setback, which is part of this proposed ordinance, is that if a lot is accepting water, we still are going to provide at least a space for water to come in and fill and go around the lot. That the water, somebody can't come in and fill to the point that the water now just sits in the right of way. Certainly there won't be the same volume of storage that may exist today, but those people do have development rights. And that was just a thought that I had during that discussion I wanted to add.
Yes, ma'am. Question?
Andy, as part of that thought, you still want that lot to be able to accept, but suppose the property owner doesn't think it's correct for him to be accepting other people's stormwater, and they just want to create a level surface that matches up with their neighbors.
Then the timing of their, we have a new stormwater ordinance that's being proposed, and it's reasonable within the context of our other setback requirements for development of a single-family lot to have a 5-foot fill setback. The graphic that just came up on the screen here shows what that 5-foot setback means. If you're going to fill your lot the maximum 2 foot allowed, then you would have 5 feet of no fill, and then with a 3-to-1 setback, you have another 6 feet of fill slope before you get to a building pad. And that's a total of 11 feet. Right now, we do have side yard setbacks that are as small as 8 feet. And that's why we included allowance for a retaining wall up to 2 feet tall maximum in this ordinance, is so that someone could put a retaining wall right there where that fill slope is and regain their side yard setback. So someone's usable, developable lot will be maintained in terms of spatially under this ordinance.
Thank you.
Other questions for Mr. Deal? Thank you, sir. Mr. Ryan, it's your turn.
I just wanted to make a point of clarification on the V-zone, the oceanfront V-zone area, and that is Technical Bulletin 5 limits you to 2 foot of landscaping fill. That's non-structural fill, so basically you're limited to what you can do as far as development of that lot. So you would not be able to go ahead and fill under a building pad in order to be able to create your foundation for your house. So due to some of the recent applications that we've had here in town, the committee went ahead and looked at some of those applications, looked at Technical Bulletin 5 to see how we could maybe make those regulations a little bit more meatier, a little bit more stringent. And that's where we came up with the 10% threshold as far as the addition of fill for the landscaping requirements. So that was all I had to add.
Any questions for Mr. Ryan? All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Edwards, did you wish to comment on this? Thank you.
Mayor Oakes and Commissioners, first of all, I'd like to thank Ms. Tigg and the committee. They have put in a tremendous amount of work over the last 13 months on this project. When we undertook this charge, we charged the committee that this was probably the most important ordinance change in at least the last 10 years and would affect more of Nags Head than anything else we've done. So we charged the committee with a set of objectives, and they were, one, to simplify the code, to stop the practice that was creating stormwater problems, look for changes that would reduce future stormwater problems, clear enforcement procedures and the threshold of those procedures, and we recommended they develop a cookbook approach for the ease of application, and that BMP manual will be that cookbook approach for ease of application. A more effective handling of permit applications and approval. That's been one of the major complaints that we have seen, is that our permitting process takes so long and you have to go back to town office so many times to get it. So looking at easing of the permitting process, a maintenance and enforcement process for stormwater facilities, in that we did not have anything in the ordinance that really allowed us to enforce maintenance of stormwater facilities. The ordinance that you have in front of you has achieved those objectives, and I think exceptionally well. Because these are significant changes, we have intentionally kept the process very ordered and very deliberate, and that also has been achieved. And finally, I would encourage you to continue the process to allow input from others who might be affected, who have not voiced their input to date. I think we've got an outstanding ordinance here. I think we need to give the public plenty of time to buy in and make any changes that they might see that we need to make. So thank you very much. Are there any questions?
Any questions for Mr. Edwards?
I have.
Yes, ma'am.
The best management practices manual, I think that's going to be a real key component. Has that process, even though we haven't approved it, has that process already begun?
That process is in progress now. It has not been completed, but it is in progress.
Okay. I had another question, and perhaps I didn't understand, and this may be more of a staff question, but you talked about fill for landscaping. Does that mean anyone that did fill for landscaping would have to be within 5 feet of their property line?
The fill for landscaping comment was for the VE zone, and that was the 10% total fill for landscaping in the VE zone.
Okay.
And that when we talked about it, that was one of the meetings I was in attendance at. We talked about it, just how much should we allow for landscaping fill, and that was the figure that we decided on. That should be plenty that those who wanted to develop a flower bed in their yard, that would be, they could bring in the fill to establish flower beds and things like that.
Okay, but without looking back, there's no requirement. Is there a requirement to be within a certain number of feet of your property line, or no?
I'll have to refer to staff on that. The meeting I was in, we didn't talk about how close it could be to the property line. Elizabeth, have that in there.
Great question, because it's important that we clarify that. There's a way to sort of scan up a little bit. What I didn't go into in my presentation, actually the other direction, is how the fill limitations work per zone. That's good, right there. So there's essentially three types, sort of tiers of regulation, if you would, related to fill. One is related to the VE zone, that's the oceanfront zone. One is related to the estuarine V zone, the backside of the island, if you would. And then the other one is everywhere else. And our goal here is not to require permitting for a flower bed. However, in the V zone, technical bulletin is pretty clear in that when you do any land disturbance at all within the V zone, you have to make sure your floodplain administrator makes a decision about whether or not you're sort of within the guidelines. So do you need to get a permit for a flower bed? No. But if you actually are doing something where you're changing the drainage and directing runoff onto another property, our floodplain administrator could respond to a complaint, or one of our zoning administrators could come in and make an investigation and make a determination at that point. Is this fill that rises to the level of something that would fall into this ordinance or not? And that's how FEMA handles it, because they want to give some flexibility for someone to, say, plant a flower bed versus someone to bring in 2 feet of fill, call it landscaping, and all of a sudden they've redirected water onto their neighbor. So there's an enforcement issue to what you bring up that we're very aware of. I did want to spend a little bit of time, if we could, scale down to the all other flood zones. And Mr. Mayor, this is what I thought you were referring to, not realizing you were still on the V zone. I had skipped ahead. But where it says all other flood zones, we allow fill, but not to exceed the base flood elevation in zones where base flood elevation is established. This means flood hazard zones that aren't X zones. And fill is allowed equal to or less than 2 feet above the pre-development surface area without an engineered stormwater plan. But what we'd like you to do is still capture and store runoff produced by a 1.5 rainfall event. And we're hoping in this best management practices manual to have a built upon area sort of impervious surface calculator that will compute runoff and then give you a menu of options, if you would, of different types of BMPs, low impact development approaches you could do on your lot. Anything from a rain barrel to a roof line rain garden, a swale, something like that. However, if you're going to use fill exceeding 2 feet above the pre-development surface, then we are going to require you to do an engineered stormwater plan, and that runoff should, we're going to ask you to actually capture more runoff, 2.15 inches of rainfall versus the 1.5 inches of rainfall. So there is sort of a differentiation we're making in terms of fill elevation in these other areas that aren't V-zone between a stormwater plan and a non-stormwater plan. In terms of the best management practices manual, we're working with the Coastal Federation, who's done one for the town of Columbia. You can go online and see an example of a best management practices manual. We're working on our runoff calculator with the helps of Mr. Deal is doing that for us. And the idea is to have easy-to-use sort of set of fact sheets that somebody could pull out and say, oh, here's how I build a rain garden. Here's the type of rain barrel that might work in my application. Here's some different choices I can use with a gutter system. So we're hoping that this best management practices manual will not be a regulatory piece of this, but will be a reference guidance document for property owners, whether they fall within these regulations or not. Hopefully, we're going to have that a draft of that available by early October. Our goal is to have something completed by mid-November. The Coastal Federation is working on a presentation, and they're trying to pull that together with us. So, thank you.
Other questions for Mrs. Teague?
When we're talking about BMPs and BMPs specifically that require annual maintenance, there's a requirement in here for an annual inspection report. And
Correct.
it lists a number of things: name and address of the property owner, the statement that the inspection was made, but it also asks for the signature of a qualified inspecting professional. Can you define that term for me?
Yeah.
It's a new employee.
It could be a property manager, maintenance person in some cases. What the BMPs that require annual maintenance are usually related to permeable surface materials, turf stone or pavers, porous pavers, some of the GeoWeb applications we might see. And the idea there is we want documentation that someone has looked at it and ensured that it's still working on an annual basis. There's some other types of engineered systems, for example, parking lot drainage boxes that you can see in a lot of urban applications that are very complex, and those also need to be maintained on a regular schedule, maybe not necessarily annually, but when BMP is part of an engineered stormwater plan, we're going to ask for the maintenance requirements up front, and then we're going to ask for a plan of reporting to the town to make sure that those are being maintained in accordance with the plan. Once a BMP stops being maintained in a permeable surface application, for example, and the pores become clogged because people haven't been sweeping it or blowing it, then it becomes just more built upon area where there's runoff and it's not working how it was designed to work. So we wanted that mechanism to get people to think about ongoing maintenance up front, to give the town a file for the record. If something's not functioning properly, we can go back and say, what is the maintenance plan for this BMP and what's going on, and then be able to appropriately act from there. In terms of qualifications for maintenance, it would depend on the level of the BMP itself. So again, permeable pavement, we just want to make sure it's being swept off on a regular basis and then it's still functioning correctly. A more engineered type of system, we would ask for an engineer to actually assure that it's still working if needed. Yes, ma'am.
As part of that, are you going to have a definition in the back so anybody can look back to the definitions part and see what would be required of them as to what professional they would need?
Yeah, most of the permeable pavement installations come with a maintenance set of guidelines. Particularly some of the new pavers that we see coming on the market, they have very specific guidelines about how you maintain it. So we want to make sure that it's not only being installed correctly, but that it'll be maintained correctly in accordance with the manufacturer's guidelines.
Yes, I'm fine. Okay. All right, any other questions for Ms. T? I was going to invite any other member of the public who wishes to make a comment may do so at this time.
Mayor and Commissioners, I'm Marvin Demers, speaking as a member of the Planning Board. I'd like to first of all endorse everything that Mr. Edwards has said about what was done by the Planning Board and by the committee. But as the chairman of the subcommittee as appointed by Mr. Edwards. First of all, he did charge us to keep in mind the importance of this work. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention a couple of things since I did chair the subcommittee. First of all was the quality and the contribution of all the people on the subcommittee. The staff was phenomenal. We had the engineers, whether they were on staff or not on staff, doing a great job. We had some planning board representatives, and in particular, we had Mr. Worsley stick with this committee throughout the duration. So we had quite a mix, and we got all sides of the issues so that we could make some good decisions on what were some very contentious issues. But for your information, to give you a little insight as to what's behind what you see, and there's a lot of pages of what you see, even though there were very contentious issues, there was almost universal consensus by the entire subcommittee on the outcome that led to what's in the ordinance. And I thought it was very important for you to know that we didn't come in here with, 7 to 6 votes, 7 for and 6 against on the outcomes. We did reach consensus almost entirely throughout the whole process. And I think that has led to what's a very good proposal for an ordinance, probably undoubtedly not totally perfect. We can use the sharp eyes of your review and other specific interests and other citizens to help tweak it and improve it wherever it needs to be. Obviously, we all want the very best possible ordinance as an outcome. But I do think you have a good product there, and what's behind it is as important as the product itself. Be happy to address any questions that you might have about the subcommittee.
Any questions for Mr. Demers?
Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. Mr. Murphy?
Being a member of the planning board and as well as the subcommittee that worked on this extensively, I too really appreciate all the members of the committee and staff. We work together incessantly, I'd say, to come to some consensus on all of this. I don't want us to, or you to move too fast at passing this, because any input that we can get from our builders, from our citizens, from our property owners, we need to at least evaluate those comments before we do anything. So I would encourage you guys, to go a little bit slow on this. We've got plenty of time, even if the subcommittee needs to meet with the commissioners, in a workshop to further discuss some things. Because there's a lot of aspects that we have discussed extensively, yet you guys are looking at it, over a few days and reading it. It's a lot to comprehend at one time. And one example is we did not want to do anything that was going to be overly restrictive to property owners so far as setbacks and swells and stormwater management, because we've got a lot of properties that we have higher lots that were either natural or filled, and they are draining to an undeveloped lot. And so we'd be remiss in requiring a property owner to do some things that his neighbors didn't have to do. And the drawing that, Roberta, could you put the drawing back up that shows the little swell and everything that was part of, you had it up just a few minutes ago. Yes, that. In that scenario, when you fill, obviously your setbacks increase drastically, from your point. So that would be overly restrictive so far as building, We tried to play with, I think that Andy mentioned, putting in a bulkhead, to cut out some of that 6-foot area. one thing we discussed was a shared swell, so that if drainage was a problem, could go in with a lot, if a lot was built on both sides, you could go in and have that particular lot owner approach the owners to the east and the west, or the north or south, whichever be the case, and say, we will pay for putting the swell in, but let's put the swell on the line. That way, you've got drainage, it doesn't affect you, and it allows us to do the setback properly, you know, and those are the type things that we discussed extensively, and I want you to understand, and I'd like for the public to understand that too, you know, that we're not trying to do something that is overly restrictive to the landowners. You know, thank you.
All right, any other member of the public who wishes to comment on this? Yes, sir.
Congratulations, committee. This is really great. I did wade through the 124 pages of PDF and the last 20, which had the ordinance out there, a couple of times. And just as a person reading it, I'd like to make 5 quick comments. Number one, and this may be industry standard, but best management practices, BMP, is becoming jargon here. And it's confusing in the doctrine. And even in the definition, BMP stands for actions, structures, and non-structures. So when you throw the word around, I'm not sure what it means. Particularly in some places, the way it's written, we have 34(3)F. The applicant shall certify that BMPs have been constructed. Well, if it's an action or a street sweeping, it's not constructed. It's jargon that's getting fuzzy. In G, installation of all stormwater BMPs installed under. It's confusing, and it's throughout the the document here. I know it's a shorthand, but it's jargon. It's if Kim were to stand up there and say, I follow best accounting practices, which is really, I got to have ledgers and journals and things, but oh yeah, my computer software is also a best accounting practice, and the fact that I add numbers up is an accounting practice, and pretty soon you don't know what she means when she's talking about her accounting practices. So I would recommend that we, and I understand it makes for a concise term, but it's not necessarily clear, and I would look through that just for that. In 34(5)B, 7, and one other place it mentions lots, off-site drainage, no fill placed to the detriment of an adjoining property. And I'd just like to be sure that adjoining is not legally restricted to the word adjacent. It's quite possible for you to do something here, send the water in the street and go down to the bottom of the hill and catch the guy at the end of the hill, not adjacent. So that's just a technical thing. Non-engineered. Now, I understand from listening to Ms. Teague's discussion of the BMP manual checklist and this, but how does a non-engineer do these plans? You have 2 choices here in all this stuff, either been an engineered plan or non-engineered. And I understand that if we have a manual and a process that you can go through and pick from A, B, C, D, like a little Chinese menu or something, you could come up with the right answer. But there was a case in Raleigh within the last year where an average citizen made traffic calculations, and DOT went after him for effectively violation of state law because a non-engineer rendered an engineering decision. So I would ask that we be sure that we not leave our own folks vulnerable to that. And I understand the need of it, you know, but, you know, for non-engineering solutions, we don't need to keep Andy and Dave any more in business than they are. But so we might want to look at that non-engineered thing to be sure that it's we're clean. And then I think, okay, that was it. But number 5, the 5th thing, I said there'd be 5, and the 5th thing is that I wish we would look at how we placed information on the website for the agenda. This is a 124-page PDF with absolutely no index, no table of contents, no nothing. Some pages are landscape, which when you read the PDF, it makes the portraits smaller and you can't read it. And the 20 pages we really needed were at the very end of it. So it would pay not just to simply fire everything into the PDF maker, then post it on the website, but have something for both the commissioners and the public to use. Thank you.
All right, other comments? Yes, sir.
Good morning. I'm Jay Overton with Albemarle and Associates. I'd like to commend the commissioners on taking on this task. I think staff's done an excellent job, planning board, all those involved. Appreciate Elizabeth coming and meeting with home builders. I was a part of that meeting, going through this and looking at it. The suggestion has been made to kind of sit back and think about this ordinance a little bit. I would highly recommend, suggest, request that y'all do that. There's a lot of stuff in here. Stormwater is not an exact science. One of the major concerns that I've got with this, I expressed it to Elizabeth, the reason that this came about was the flooding that we had last year. What we're doing with this ordinance, as I see it, is we're not going back and taking care of all of the things that already exist. Those things that exist are the things that caused our situation last year. This ordinance is focusing on new development or redevelopment, and we should do a better job, no question. But I'd hate for this board, staff, and especially the residents to think that because we're putting this ordinance in effect, we're not going to see that situation occur next year. Because it's going to take a while to undo what we've done. It's going to take some specific things on the town's part that aren't going to be individual lot owners, whether they got a house now or whether they're looking to build one, that can be resolved by their doings. That the town's going to have to take on some things. I know y'all familiar with what's going on at Vista Colony. We're involved with other developments, other towns as far as looking at stormwater, groundwater. And we've got a bowl we live in, which was shown with one of the illustrations. When we get a high groundwater table, we don't have any other place for the water to go. So there's some real issues here that are beyond what's in this ordinance and need to be looked at. A couple other things that the last gentleman just spoke about, non-engineered systems. That was one of the things that we brought up to Elizabeth the other day. Please don't put the residents in a position that you're asking them to provide information, although you're giving them the data, that you're asking them to do calculations and render an engineering decision or opinion based upon this information. One of the things that talks about infiltration rates in there, that 0.52, that comes out of the state manual as a minimum for infiltration rates. One of the things that I haven't been able to find in the state manual that is in this ordinance is a sandy textured material. And it talks about having a sandy textured material with this infiltration rate. Anybody can tell you what a sandy textured material is. If we kind of leave it at that, this is my opinion, that the material that you're putting your stormwater in is a sandy material, that doesn't require an engineer or a geologist to know that. It will require one to be able to tell you if it's 0.52 or greater infiltration rate. So there's little things like that that we can do to help administer this. Again, not put the residents or the staff in that position. The other thing that was just mentioned again is that when I develop my lot, that I can't do anything that's going to adversely affect other people. And drainage law has always been there, that you can't do anything to impede the downstream or create some upstream or create some problem downstream. But one of the concerns that I would have is what I think, Bob, you brought up earlier about what do you do about that lot that all the water's been going to over these years. When you create your stormwater management plan and you implement it on your lot, If other water's been going to the lot, you have just adversely affected that. So, that statement can be interpreted many, many different ways, and I think that's something that we need to be really concerned about as far as how that may come back around to get us 5 or 10 years from now. But again, I just want to stress, please take time looking at this. I'm sure, aside from Andy and David, there's many other people within the engineering community that would give input if they're asked. I think we got to be looking at, we all live here. We're way beyond 50% on build out. We're going to be dealing with a lot of things in the years to come that we want to go back and do a better job than we've done before. And this is a good start, but it's not going to take care of last year's problem just by implementing this. And that's something that those that are watching on TV, or if it gets in the paper or whatever, I think they really need to understand that y'all are doing a good job to move this forward. But you can't solve all the problems with just one ordinance rewrite. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Overton. All right, does anybody else wish to comment on this? This is your chance. All right, does the board wish to receive any other information on this before it begins deliberations? If not, this will conclude the public hearing on this proposed text amendment, and the town Board of Commissioners may begin its deliberations.
I'm going to suggest that we not necessarily do a lot of deliberating on this today. What I'd like to do is give the public another opportunity to comment, and set perhaps a time specific for us to review this again. It's a lot of information. That 124 pages is chock full. And we've gotten some good comments. I think we need to take those into consideration. I appreciate staff reaching out to the home builders and to the engineering community. And we'd be delighted to hear anything else that they had to say. I appreciate the committee trying to reach consensus. I'm sure there were compromises made somewhere in there, but good work. It's a huge topic, and it will affect us as we go forward. I'm going to suggest either mid-September or mid-October to bring this back to the board. Comments, suggestions?
Mid-October might actually give more of the public a chance to do something. And the 1st of October, I think somebody may be gone. That'll give Doug also an opportunity to read and get a better grasp of it, I think. I mean,
for me, 2 weeks is probably still not enough. I mean, it's a lot to digest, and I appreciate the fact there was a lot of background from the different committee members as they discussed issues to give some idea to the thought process of how they arrived at things. I think the committee did a great job, and I took note of Mr. Edwards' 13 months process. I don't think we can do it in a couple weeks or 4 days, and I just think that we really need to think about it. And I'd like to see some of the changes that have been suggested, how they're going to be incorporated into whatever we do.
I too would prefer a mid-October meeting. I think we do need time to gather more input from the public. It would be nice if there was some way that they could, in addition to calling or sending emails, if there's somewhere on the website that they could provide their input and their comments so that we can collect all of those instead of you get an email and I get an email. We don't all get the same information. So if there's some vehicle by which we could do that, that would be great. And we had a process when we did our recreation plan, our Parks and Rec plan, and we sat around a large table with the committee, and we literally went through it line by line for everybody to make comments, and we just made real-time changes at that point based on the information, and I thought that was a good process. So I would hope we could do something similar so we're all engaged, fully engaged in that, and have an opportunity to hear the responses to our questions and make those changes at the time.
Okay, I hear some consensus to look at this again at the mid-October meeting. I would like us to schedule times in these next couple of meetings when the public can make additional comments on it. Just get as much public comment as we can. And I'm going to make a motion to table this to the mid-October meeting.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, like sign. Board, I'm sorry we didn't take a break this morning.
Some of us are dying from
Yes.
5-minute recess.
I guess it's my fault.
We're going to call our meeting back to order. We do have a time-specific item at 12 o'clock, so we're going to break in just a minute or two to go to that. I did want to cover one item before we go to that, and that is the consideration of the agreement with NCDOT for a comprehensive pedestrian plan and consideration of pedestrian plan committee members. Ms. Teague, if you'll move quickly through that.
Yes, what we'd like is your permission to move forward with the municipal agreement. This allows us to accept grant monies to carry out the comprehensive pedestrian master plan. Also, I'd like to ask for your consideration of appointment to a steering committee. We would accept your names. We're looking for people who are interested in pedestrian planning issues and may be tied to both public health and safety concerns, education, and the development community. As always, we can come back to you in October with that list for your approval. But with your permission, we would like to move forward with the municipal agreement.
Discussion, any comments? We will have an opportunity to suggest committee members, and we've had some volunteers already.
I think, are there volunteers already from the planning board? Is that what I read?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And this comprehensive plan will be finished, or must be finished, by July 15th of next year, or July 31st.
It has to be to a place where you're showing due diligence, but you actually have a year and a half to actually adopt the plan. And
Okay. So, all right. That is just for anyone who wants to be on this. It's not going to be a short, it's not going to be a 2-week
Right. It will be
progress.
at least a year's planning process.
Thank you. I make the motion that we go ahead with this grant
To
application.
execute the municipal agreement with
Yes.
DOT. We have a motion on the floor.
Second?
We have a second. Further discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, like sign. Motion passes unanimously. We are going to take a recess to meet over at we're going to have a tour of the community care clinic, and then we're going to have a tour of Colony Ridge. And that's going to start at 12 o'clock. We're going to break now to get over there, and then we'll be back at 2 o'clock to continue the business of the day, okay? We're going to stand in recess until 2 o'clock. Ready, Court? Good afternoon. We're going to come back into session after a very nice tour of the community care clinic and Colony Ridge facilities. Congratulations to the community care clinic on their renovations and the way it turned out, and best wishes to Colony Ridge on a quick start. Our next item is discussion of maximum allowable area for retail structures within the commercial outdoor recreation overlay district. Elizabeth, sorry.
Hello again. This is a discussion item in that we'd like some more specific feedback from the Board of Commissioners as to where you'd like us to go next with this. At your August 7th meeting, the Commissioners directed planning staff to review the existing regulations in the commercial outdoor recreation overlay district and to prepare modifications to ensure that the current character of the district is maintained, and also to look specifically at footprints of buildings. The concern here was to offset a large big box store going into that recreational district. The planning board took up this discussion at their last meeting and voted to go ahead and reduce and severely restrict that footprint to a 15,000 square foot maximum footprint, because that would then also kick in residential architectural guidelines. I think the intent there with the planning board was to create an option for a placeholder if the board should want it, and to allow them to go back and continue discussion to really look at the district, future planning issues, and what may or may not be appropriate for that district. Unfortunately, I know our planning board chair could not be here this afternoon, but he did ask me to convey that that the planning board really, their intent was to look at long-term planning and to revisit this discussion as necessary based on your direction. So I'm happy to answer any questions or to help facilitate further discussion on this as needed.
Questions for Liz? Yes, ma'am?
Not a question, comment about, a little bit of history about how this came about. This district came about when we started having more requests for outdoor recreation, and knowing that our sound front was fairly limited as far as accessibility. I know you can access it through Soundside Road and different things, but those were more residential districts. And so there was a desire to allow our patrons, our visitors to the area, and our residents a place to have outdoor recreation. And it goes from Lakeside Drive all the way around on the causeway to pretty much the Little Bridge or Oasis Suites. And at the time, there were limits as to how many each vendor could have, kind of thing, in order to give competition. But it was a goal to have an area that was visible, that had soundside access. We've even gone in and put soundside accesses in for passive recreation through the Harvey site, Little Bridge Estuarine, and the Interpretive Center near Whalebone Tackle. But that's how it came about, was because our access to the sound was fairly limited. But we did want to have recreation, and both commercially and residentially, for our citizens and visitors.
I guess a follow-up comment to that, the overlay district, I think, was intended to allow some things in this section of C2 that weren't allowed in other areas in the town in C2. Dowdy's Amusement Park probably being the biggest example of that. The go-kart track across from my house being another one. But I think the way, when I looked at that overlay district, it was allowing additional uses, not restricting the uses that were already allowed in C2. And this seems to be going the other way a little bit.
That's great. Could we show that map? Attached in your packet here, you'll see a map that shows the area of the overlay district there in yellow. It's actually in addition and sort of a subset of, if you would, the hotel overlay district. And Mr. Mayor, you're correct in that if you read the intent of that overlay district, it is to allow outdoor recreation and this sort of develop this area for the purpose of recreation, in addition to other uses allowed in the C2. So this is, as best I can tell right now, this was a concern more about footprint and massing and trying to preserve this area. And the planning board discussion reflected that. They didn't necessarily want to go forward to limit uses or to downzone, but they were concerned about uses that might take up so much room that they changed the nature of this area and prevented future recreational opportunities from being developed.
One of the things, I mean, I'm not prepared to take any action on this personally today. One of the things I'd asked for a few weeks ago was a copy of the Dare County ordinance about when it went to $19,999, because it gave some architectural guidelines to go with it. And I'd kind of like to have that just as a frame of reference, just to look at, as well as, any other ideas that may be out there as well.
one of the things that hit me too in this is we've got a list of the structure's square footages that are in that overlay district right now, and if you went with the planning board's recommendation, you're getting into nonconformities. It would make Tanger Mall nonconforming. And then it's amazing to see that the Gateway Bank, the one we have up here, it's actually over 20,000 square feet. It doesn't look it. It's, I guess it's the visual thing. But anyway, saying all that, it comes down to, you put things in the overlay district, you want to kind of to get eventually all the outdoor recreation down that way because of the sound. You wanted to kind of maintain a vista there. On the ocean front, other than our beach accesses, what have we done to maintain the ocean front vista? I mean, I know you're going to say we limited height to 35 feet with the exception of, but I can't see over 35 feet if I'm standing on the beach road. I'm just, I go back to I've been thinking about this a lot, and I've read, and one of the reasons I've been thinking about it a lot is because of what the town and the tourism board did years ago, and that's buy that piece of property for future use, whatever it may be. But if you don't like the house next door that's being built, you probably should have bought that lot, so it could stay empty. Where do you draw the line in the preservation of the sound vista if you didn't think about it years ago and do the same thing with the buying up oceanfront properties to keep that vista?
I think we have setbacks that preserve some kind of vista, on the beach road, so the side setbacks and those kind of things, so that we don't have a wall of buildings.
That's right.
And I think that was a big step, and we have
Wouldn't-
side setbacks on every piece of property.
Wouldn't that also work with your sound vistas
Yes.
in preservation?
I think so.
It does to a great extent.
Mhm.
But visually, I mean, you take a look at something really huge,
Mhm.
that changes your vista as well.
Mhm.
But I think, I don't think anybody has a heart. As things develop, zoning is a constantly evolving,
Mhm.
just like our land use plan is constantly evolving. That's what you take a
Changing.
look at. I don't think anybody wants to deny anybody reasonable use of their property. I certainly don't. But I think we would have to take a long-term look at what we want our town to look like. If you want a frame of reference, go back to, good Lord, 30 years ago, when Walmart wanted to come and be on our sound front. And the people that were here, before they ever built in Kitty Hawk, Walmart looked at Nags Head and wanted Nags Head.
Oh, I know, and that was a big box store. That's why we reduced, or one of the
No, it
reasons
wasn't.
it was not?
No, it wasn't. This was way before anybody ever started discussing it. They wanted too many concessions. I mean, I wasn't even on the board at the time, but they wanted tons of concessions as to what they could do with lot coverage and different things. But think of how different a dynamic Nags Head would be if we had the Walmart store.
Mhm.
It'd be totally different dynamic in Nags Head. And I mean, members of this board have talked for years that the Nags Head look, we wouldn't have looked anywhere like Nags Head. So, I mean, these are things that you think about and why you have zoning and look at things along those lines.
I've got a question for Elizabeth, if I may. Are there some massing restrictions that are currently in place? Some ratios and that type of thing? And along with that, to build a 30 or 40,000 square foot building, how much land would that take if you're limited to 33% lot coverage?
55% commercial.
55% for commercial, okay, for C2.
Yeah. If we could go back to that map, just, there are several already in place. Certainly setbacks are already there in C2. The same C2 dimensional requirements would apply to this district as it does other places in terms of side, rear, and front yard setbacks. But also you have the estuary and the wetlands that are there. And we have lot coverage limitations within our zoning that already would restrict the footprint to some degree. In this particular area where you do have a lot of these estuaries and wetland areas, CAMA rules would be in place, as well as Army Corps wetland setbacks would also be in place. So on a lot by lot basis, you would find that certain rules may apply to create that open space in this area already on the books.
Now, one of the things that I recall us having with hotels was and maybe my recaller is off, but there was the higher the hotel, the wider the setback you had to have.
That was right.
Is that, and that's, since this is also a hotel overlay district, those same things would apply in that regard. But I think that's one of the things that's one of the reasons that we don't have any additional hotels since the Nags Head Inn was built back in '85, and I think that was one of those unintended consequences. So we want to be careful with what we do, because you get results that you didn't always think you would get. And it's hard to turn that back, which I think we're finding in hotels. Now the town's not responsible for going out and developing hotels, and there's some pieces out there that could have developed as hotels, but they didn't, and that's not necessarily the town's fault as well. There are some economic pieces there. So, yes, ma'am.
I have a question for you, because I wasn't on the board at the time when the recreational overlay district was created, but I seem to remember that evolved from some jet ski issues. Was Bill Meredith on the board when this was developed? And I think you had like Willett's Wet Sports, you had Bill Meredith's place, you had Ralph Buxton's place, and I think, were they not trying to work out some?
I think that was a separate issue. I did something with jet skis, and it was a long time ago. But it ended up where you could only have 6 jet skis per business, and you couldn't expand.
The overlay
the
district
number of
actually
businesses.
came after Bill got off the board. Bill was on the board in the early 90s, and I think this came about in the mid-90s, and I think Bill was right off the board, but it was, at the time, outdoor recreation was proliferating. Same reason that you don't allow trailers on the beach to drop off the jet skis, because that was part of the discussion at the time, were people that wanted to put their jet skis and then go up, and we adopted rules that said you had to go out so many feet rather than stay in the surf zone where the swimmers are.
Okay.
It was all part of a big discussion.
And I think the idea there was to center all that outdoor recreational activity out of the residential districts. I'm not sure that was the right thing to do, y'all, but
I'm not sure how much sound frontage we had at the time, because the only other recreational, sound front properties you had were pretty much the Cove, Soundside Road, Lakeside, the Village.
The other thing that concerns me just a little, again, I certainly could not, and we're not going to do anything today, but I could not reduce that square footage to 15,000. Excuse me. It's yet to be seen what will be erected, built, whatever, on the land there at the old Windmill Point site. And at this time, while there is not a large structure being proposed at this minute, there is the possibility that as the future goes on and the funds become available, that what is being planned for that site now, in the short term, that that whole concept could evolve into a structure or two that would certainly be larger than what the planning board is looking at. And even though we have nothing in concrete, the thought has been all along that whatever is built there eventually will be not something long and running, but again, to go as high as allowed and have your setbacks so that there's always vistas there so that you don't lose that sound front view. So maybe rather than restricting the size of a building, you might want to consider removing certain allowables in the C2 district and the overlay district.
May I say something?
Yes, ma'am.
Maybe I'm not looking at this correctly, but, you know, plans change all the time. I mean, you know, the event site is a wonderful addition. It may, in the short term, remain as open space, and one day it may end up being a mini conference center, could be a hotel. Who knows how it will morph over time. And that's a government-owned property. But the rest of these properties are owned by businesses. I mean, it's a commercial district, and I think, you know, there are certain rights and privileges that go with that, and while we may be able to reduce that and change it, when we do that, we change the value of that property. And I guess that concerns me, you know. I think while we regulate, if we want to buy it, we can do what we want to with it. If we're not willing to buy it, we do have limitations as to what we can tell people they can do with it, as long as it's within our ordinances. And I know this is about an ordinance change, but it's a big one. If we were to change it from 40,000, which was a decision that was made, and we do have some places that are more than 40,000, but that decision was made because it was a town value. And I think that was made based on a lot of input from surveys and community and things like that. And this would be a significant change, you know, that I think you need community input on. Just my personal.
That's why I think we don't need to act on a first bite at this apple. I think we need to have much more discussion, not just take a look at one thing, but look at different things. Look at different places, look at different other concepts. That's where I am. More information.
I'd like us to include looking at the amount of C2, that's property that's zoned C2, that actually is not being used that way and is never going to be used that way again. And the Galleon and the Restaurant by George both fall into that category.
I thought we did that about 3 or 4 years ago, and we were amazed at how little commercial that there is left. But we can do it again.
Houses. Once we start
Well,
allowing
we
houses,
did. I
that
mean,
did
we,
away
you know,
with-
we built houses.
Yep.
That was part of that whole Beach Road
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
committee work as well.
Okay.
This enough direction, Elizabeth?
Well, I guess I would like to ask if there's something in particular that the board was looking for the planning board to really look at. And I think the planning board was trying to jump ahead to some of the concerns they thought you may have. And, you know, if it's not footprint and architectural guidelines, you know, are there some other things that you really wanted us to look at? For example, the types of uses. The planning board sort of touched on it in their discussion, but backed off of that for fear of rendering anybody non-conforming.
I think they need to take a broad look at it, whether it's footprint, whether it's uses. I think they need to take a real broad look at it. Footprint's what started the discussion,
Okay.
but that doesn't mean where we end up.
Okay. Sure.
And I think that was one of the things that we looked at with, when Tanger was being developed, was maintaining some views through there. It was in separate buildings, so there was a little bit maintained. I think, I'm speaking for me, not for the board, but the planning board jumped a little bit too far too fast, probably.
Okay.
No offense to any planning board members.
Thank you.
Any other comments on that, y'all? Next item is, gotta find my place, committee reports.
Well, as usual,
You've got
you're tight
something,
on me. The tourism board met so long ago, I had to go back and, it was actually mid-August, and it seems like it's been like a year ago. But anyway, some of the reporting that was out at that time is already outdated, and I will tell you, I hate that we get the statistics so late. Like in June, it was just through June that we got the, the occupancy and meals. But at that time, the end of June, it did show that the numbers year to date were still up 0.72%. And the occupancy by district, Nags Head through June, was up 7.8%. And this is actually 2.9% over this time last year in June, which was good. The gross collection on retail sales was slightly up at the end of June, 2%, but compared to this time last June, down 2%. And anyway, I won't say anything about the new numbers. I am very disappointed that the towns of Kill Devil Hills and Nags Head did not receive any grant money to further the holiday theme. Remember, we discussed this, I think, in one of our meetings early on, and we were hopeful of getting something that would help the towns to continue their decorations and get on board with that OBX, Christmas theme. But we were the only 2 out of the 11 that didn't receive any money. Anyway, we were able to help 9 other grants. We couldn't give all the money because we emptied our pockets. I'll tell you, it's amazing how many grant requests that we're getting now. And because of that, I believe that the Grants Committee, working with staff, is going to try to fine-tune the requirements that the people who are writing requests for grants will have better direction. In other words, if it's kind of impossible for you to get it, it's going to spell it out, what you need and what's not going to work. Also, they're going to shorten the time period and get more grants in at the same time so they can be looked at a broader range. And one of the things they're going to be looking at for the grants is that after year 3 that you need to show a plan from the beginning of how you can become self-sustainable. There will still always be, well, I won't say always, but there's still that event after the event, after you've used up all your years, there's as long as you increase by a certain number, I think it's 10%, or you have a new event that you're still eligible for grant monies, like the marathons or whatever. The most exciting thing I think we did was had a public meeting August 26th on the event site. And we had, Cliff was there. We had, about 40 people, Cliff, maybe? Turned out, and actually people from all kinds of event makers, participants, etc. The 3 alternatives that were proposed, I think you've probably seen them in the papers. They're all open air type things at this point. And some have larger event sites than others. Some have more parking if the event sites are using less land. But it's pretty much devoid of buildings at this time, with the exception of the bathrooms and a small office and maintenance area, which is projected to go on the very north end of the property, which will be kind of right there behind Dairy Queen. So again, to protect that open space. There's also proposed a small, and I think we're going to change the wording, amphitheater, because everybody's thinking that it's an amphitheater like Roanoke Island Festival Park. It is not. It's on a much smaller scale. It's similar to the one in Duck. And that is proposed to be at the south end and can be moved so that it doesn't interfere with the sun and the patrons and so forth. So that, or it doesn't have to be. The one thing that kind of holds strong the thread through the whole pattern is that you maintain those vistas, whether it's one large or several small, and we're talking about maybe some pencil structures that will have a roof for shade, that kind of thing. But it was well received. The only thing that we felt that we didn't quite make everybody happy over was, I think, some of the event producers that need a building. We did not have an answer for them. And the VHB, both John and Chris did say that they would go back to the drawing board to see if there would be something that we could put in these original plans that may be an area that would have a roof and perhaps detachable sides that could be used in December and January, where you could have, you know, some heat in there for like a wedding expo or Taste of the Beach or something like that. So none of this is in concrete, but it really was well received. I was happy to hear the comments that were out there. And if you all have any suggestions, we'll be going back to the drawing board, I think, sometime in September and get, hopefully, something more in October. The important thing to know is that at this point, because Cliff, I think you'll back me up on this, Susie, you were there, it was made very clear that the town is not building any, it doesn't have any monetary money in this property other than our ownership of the land, and that the line item with the tourism board is not a huge line item. This will have to be done in phases. So the feel alone that land is going to require will probably eat up the first year and a half's budget.
Thank y'all very much for the work on it. Thank you and Susie both for going as well. I'm sorry I had a football game and made a mistake.
That was okay. You knew we
Yeah.
could report back to you.
Anything else under committee reports, y'all? Our next item is consideration of an appeal from taxi cab drivers for denial of permit. Mr. Harris? Thank you, sir. Chief, you want to lead us through this?
Good afternoon, Mayor, Board of Commissioners. Mr. Harris applied to the Nags Head Police Department on July 18th for a permit to operate a taxi in the town of Nags Head. As part of that process and through the background investigation, I was not able to issue a permit due to information that was obtained through a criminal record check. And I explained to Mr. Harris, I've met with him on one or two occasions and have talked to him about the process, and obviously told him what he could do through the Board of Commissioners.
And what we've generally done is gone into closed session to hear these, John?
That's correct, in order to hear the basis for his recommendation. That's correct, yes, sir. And so at the appropriate time, you can go into closed session, and I'll give you the statutory basis for that.
And I assume you're going to say the same essentially about Mr. Witt?
Mr. Witt as well. He applied on August the 1st, and then due to information that was received during the criminal background check, I was unable to approve his permit to operate a taxi.
This being the appropriate time, I'm going to make a motion for us to go into closed session pursuant to...
It's General Statute 143-318.11A1.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, like sign. And we will take them one at a time.
Yes, sir.
Okay. We're going to come back out of closed session. John, we usually ask you to report, but...
Yes, sir. Well, the board received information during the closed session, which is confidential under state law and must remain confidential, but no action was taken.
Okay. I'm going to make a motion that we approve permits for both of these gentlemen for taxi cab permits.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, like sign. Motion passes unanimously. Good luck, gentlemen. Please be careful. Our next item is the minutes.
Thank you. Was it number 3?
And that was a correction on the minutes, Commissioner Walters?
It's just a minor correction on the minutes from our workshop from August 21st. Page 3, third paragraph. It states Commissioner Walters noted that crosswalks at Jeanette's Pier and Nags Head Fishing Pier are also needed. I've already talked to Carolyn. There is a crosswalk at Jeanette's Pier. We're talking about putting one at Outer Banks Pier, but there is not one at Nags Head Pier, so I just thought we should look at that one also.
Good you caught that. We knew what you meant. We knew what you meant.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
Second.
Further discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, like sign. Motion passes unanimously. Now on to the attorney. Discussion of water consumption unit process.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The board had asked me to do two things here, and one is to make a recommendation regarding the request that you have received from Bobby Harrell on behalf of Sunnyside Elevators to redeem certain water consumption units. The second was to talk with the board about a proposed process for making decisions on these particular requests. I'll talk first about the request submitted by Mr. Harrell. What we had discussed at the last meeting was that it was important for the board to be satisfied that anyone who is seeking redemption of these prepaid water consumption units be able to demonstrate that in fact they are the true owner of those units. And because of the history that surrounds the issuance of the prepaid water consumption units to Ammons Dare Corporation, and then the transfers from there to various ultimate property owners, sometimes these things are a little difficult to track. In connection with the request by Mr. Harrell, we were able to do a chain of title for the real property all the way from Ammons Dare to Sunnyside Elevator. Unfortunately, we could not find a set chain of the transfer of the WCUs along with that. In fact, one of the problems we had was that the purchase contract by which presumably Sunnyside received the real estate that it owns now from Intracoastal, there was an agreement by which Intracoastal agreed to issue to Fred Suter the water consumption units through the deed. Unfortunately, the deed doesn't mention the units. So we couldn't tie that chain together. But what I've recommended, and we have had numerous, actually the managers had numerous conversations or communications with Mr. Harrell about this and explained to him what was needed. And ultimately, he indicated that he did not have the documentation that we were looking for, but that he was willing to provide an affidavit verifying the essential facts to show the necessary link which, depending on what that affidavit is, it may be sufficient to satisfy these purposes. So we haven't gotten such an affidavit yet, but I think he understands what we need to do, and I'm glad to talk with him about that. So with respect to this particular request, at this time, we've not been able to verify the actual ownership of the WCUs in the entity who's requesting them, although it is certainly possible, probably probable, that they'll be able to do so, but at this time, we just can't say, yes, we're satisfied. Secondly, on the procedural issue, we talked about this at the last meeting, but basically I've decided to recommend that you all go through a fairly routine process for these in the future. And of course, there's a couple of things for you to consider here. One of them, and if Roberta will put up the proposed resolution that I've drafted that would establish a procedure to be followed, one of the issues I have, I'm assuming that the board's wish here is, from the conversations or the discussions that the board's had, is that it wants these kinds of decisions to be made administratively, not to have to come before the board every time. And if that's the case, then what I've proposed here will provide that. Basically, this resolution outlines the background for the issuance of the WCUs and the issues that the town has regarding the redemption of the WCUs, and then establishes a process that a person who claims to be holding WCUs and wishes to have them redeemed can go through. Basically, this process would require is that the person who's holding them must first submit a written application to the town specifying the number of water consumption units that they claim to hold, and acknowledge that once these are redeemed, that they can no longer make any use of that particular prepaid water consumption unit. The application would also, yes, in fact, the numbered paragraphs is where we're going through them. The application would also include a statement made under oath verifying that the applicant is, in fact, the owner of the claimed WCUs. The next step would be that the party who requests the redemption must provide a chain of title to the town that they would prepare or have prepared by a North Carolina licensed attorney certifying that the applicant is the owner of and has full rights and title to the claimed units. Then the town staff and the town attorney would review the application and the claimed chain of title, determine whether redemption of the claimed prepaid units is consistent with town ordinances and allowed by town ordinances. And again, that's an issue that under some of the town ordinances that govern these WCUs, there's not an automatic right of redemption. Certain properties do not qualify for redemption. So that's one of the issues we'd have to determine is whether the ordinance allows for the redemption of properties. The ordinance, the resolution would also allow that the town staff and the town attorney can require additional documentation is considered necessary to ensure that no other party can assert these kinds of rights. For example, that would be the affidavit that we've requested from Mr. Harrell. Then if the town staff and attorney are satisfied that the applicant has demonstrated its ownership of the claimed units and that the units can be redeemed in compliance with Chapter 44 of the Town Code, then the town staff must determine that there are funds available, surplus funds available for that purpose, which is one of the conditions that was set forth in the original agreement between the town and Ammons Dare, that they would be refunded when such funds were available for that purpose. And if all those conditions are met, this resolution provides that the units can then be redeemed by the town's payment of $2,000 per unit. The party receiving the payment must sign an acknowledgement that payment by the town constitutes payment in full and final satisfaction of any and all claim or right to claim title to the WCU, and this is something that can be handled administratively. So that's the process that we'd recommend that we go through at this point for anybody else who wishes to have WCUs redeemed.
Questions from Mr. Lady? Anna?
John, I have several.
Okay.
I think one of the charges that we gave to the mayor to give to you was, is the town, is this, I'm sure it'll be legal, but is this something that the town is required to do? Were you ever able
Yes.
to?
Well, the answer is yes. The town is obligated to redeem WCUs under certain circumstances, but it's under no time constraint to do so.
Okay, okay, saying all of that, okay, now you have given us a process which the applicant can go through.
That's right.
Is there any cost that the town bears in all of the 1 through 5?
There'd be some cost, particularly for purposes of reviewing the application, deciding whether or not this meets the literal terms, reviewing the chain of title put together by their attorney, deciding whether any additional information is required. There would be some cost involved in that, yes.
And so the town eats that cost?
That's correct.
We did have their attorney draw up the chain of title.
I know
so-
that they've done the chain, but now it's up to town attorney to review the chain of title and then ask for further documentation if so needed, and then he's gonna review that, and I forget how many dollars an hour he is, don't wanna mention it. But I'm just wondering if, isn't there some way to recoup? I mean, I know that there's certainly substantial money in numbers of WCUs. I'm just wondering, is anybody else concerned about what the town may be? I mean, are we getting into a costly refund that perhaps the cost of that refund should not be borne by the taxpayer and rather that it be borne by the applicant?
I think we're talking about limited numbers of people that will be coming and asking for refunds of these WCUs. We have had the use of the money for, since
At
87 or
1%
so.
interest?
So I would like to minimize those costs to the town, certainly. I agree
Yeah,
wholeheartedly
yeah.
with that. But I don't know that we should charge a fee for applying for it. We'd spend more money setting up the fee.
Just sharing my concerns.
That's
okay.
One thing I would like to mention on that, I don't know if this is really particularly pertinent, actually a couple things. One is the cost for doing this really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether someone's seeking the redemption of 1 unit or 10 units or 24 units. You know, the cost is the same. But at the same time, the units at this point, they were purchased for $2,000 or issued upon the prepayment of $2,000 per unit, and that's the price at which the town would redeem them. Of course, the current WC unit fee is $1,000 more. So one of the things about this that's always, that in working on this has puzzled me is I still think that there's a chance that people could reapply these WCUs if they redevelop a particular piece of property that they hold. And if that was the case, they'd have to pay a higher fee than what they've got right now. So I think there's an inherent value in these. But if somebody wants to go ahead and get their cash back now, I mean, it's up to the town to decide whether it wants to establish this process, since it doesn't have a compulsion right now, but it does have an obligation at some point to redeem these.
Did we ever come up with that number, is it not in the 90s?
97, I think, or 93.
But that doesn't mean 97 individual owners. It's
that's
groups.
correct.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Renee.
No. My question would be, given that this could occur at any time, should we consider this as part of the budget process? Or does it just, it doesn't matter?
I mean, to me, it's
I have a
more,
question for that.
It's a balance sheet transaction, so it doesn't have a budgetary impact, so it can be decided outside of the budget process without impacting this.
Thank you, Kim.
I like the process.
I think
That's the important part, is just having a process by which to deal with it.
my key question to John was, is there an obligation? And I think he was very much of the opinion that there is an obligation. There's not a time frame on that obligation, but I don't see necessarily a benefit in putting it off either. We don't have cash flow constraints with so much.
Yeah.
Action on this, John? Resolution? Did I-
Yes, I propose that y'all, I recommend that y'all adopt this resolution, and And again, the key thing here was that I assumed y'all wanted to get out of this loop and let staff handle that, and so that's one of the features I kept in here. I toyed with the idea of whether doing this and making a recommendation to the board, but I assumed that you would rather have this recommendation made by staff and decided by staff.
Everybody okay with that?
Yes.
I didn't see that resolution in my packet, but,
No, I did not get it to staff in time for preparation with the packet, although that would have been sometime last week, I guess.
It may say something different than you did, so let us read it again.
has everybody had a chance to review it on the screen? We'll take a couple more.
You can't make it the whole screen.
If you did, it wouldn't be,
Yep, looking hard.
Yeah, and then you read us 1 through 5.
yeah.
You want to do it mid-month?
Comfortable with that.
I mean, there's no pressing.
It's not a, I mean, I don't think it's but so complex. Everybody comfortable with
I am.
voting on this at this point? Okay, I'll move the resolution that's on the screen regarding WCU refund procedures.
Second.
We have a motion, we have a second. Is there further discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, like sign. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Mr. White.
Thank you. And other than that, I believe that there was a desire to enter closed session at the appropriate time in order to confer with the town attorney and preserve the attorney-client privilege.
Mr. Ogburn?
Just two things. One, it looks as though we got word today that our amendments to our land use plan should be on the CRC agenda for September 24th to the 26th is when their meeting is scheduled. I saw it on their website, 24th and 26th, and it's at Jeanette's Pier. So hopefully that packet will be coming out soon. And then also just to Mr. Scott's family, Coochie, and all the Scott family on behalf of the town and town staff, we just extend our love and prayers and sympathy to them on the passing of a pioneer for the town of Nags Head, and he will be missed by all of us.
Thank you, sir. Board of Commissioners agenda. Commissioner Walters?
A request that, when we were discussing stormwater this morning, as the changes are made, if we could get those pages to put in this book and be told what tab to put them behind and where what they're gonna replace as part of that, since I know staff put the book together in a great hurry, and I appreciate that fact. But if we could get those changes, know where they're
Yes,
gonna go.
ma'am.
That's one. It was, there's.
Oh,
it's there
that's the
somewhere.
hard copy today. Okay.
The other thing, as we move forward, and I apologize for not being at our workshop with DOT in August, as I was out of town, but one of the things I'd like for us to take a look at, since we talk about stormwater, we talk about flooding, is a flap valve at the Catfish Farm. All that water that goes out of Whalebone is great, but on a northwest wind, that's where all the water in Whalebone comes from, is it comes in that pipe. And it looks like there'd be a check valve so that the water on a northwest wind couldn't come in there and flood the entire Whalebone area. It was done to get rid of water. It shouldn't be there to allow water in. And the only other thing that I have is we had a great surfing event over the Labor Day weekend. We had more cars in Whalebone than I believe I've seen since the day the pier was dedicated. It was a great event. It was a lot of traffic. Thankfully, most of it moved very safely. But the one thing I do see a need for, there's a lot of people turning left into the pier. There's a lot of people turning left as you're coming out of South Nags Head to get into restaurants, hotels, different places. And the impatient people that pass on the right, which is illegal in North Carolina, about 50% of them appear to be North Carolina or either OBX tags. And it'd be nice to sure have in that area no passing on right signs, because that's an area that has an awful lot of pedestrians and people on bicycles. And when they pass on the right, as you're coming out of South Nags Head, they're actually driving on the bike path. And if they pass on the right heading south, all those people are walking north to go to ice cream shops, hotels, back to the places where the rental cottages that are across the street, and somebody's going to get hit, and that'd be an area where it'd be nice if DOT would put up some do not pass on right signs per state law. There's just a lot of movement going on in that corner now, and when we have events like what we had this weekend, it took an awful lot of vigilant drivers to not hit people. And I'm very appreciative of that fact that no one got hurt down there on that. And it was a great event. It was well managed. That's it.
Mr. Sutton?
Following up on what Cliff just said about Ronnie Scott, I'd like to ask the board if they would do the same thing for him that we did for Doris Scard, and we all just saw her over at the nursing home, and that's to retire his beach driving permit number, if that would be okay. Have that framed. And
Number 1.
he was here a long time. I met him 45 years ago.
I think the family would appreciate that.
Could we do that? Okay. His family
By
would appreciate that.
consensus.
The only other thing I want to mention is, and it's certainly something that I thought we had fixed for those folks over there, and that's Admiral Street. Came up with that, do not go in here from Memorial, no right turn, from west to east. It has been brought to my attention that there is still some problems with people deciding that they're not going to go all the way around the block to get back into the street the correct way. And I've talked to Kevin about it, and Kevin's been over there. He's sat on porches, kind of watching for the culprit. He's had unmarked police cars out there to kind of sit and watch, and I really think that he's only been able to get one person who was a repeat offender, and kind of went down and explained to them that they really can't do that. But I did talk to another family on that street just day before yesterday, and just to confirm that this is still ongoing, people using that street that way that they should not be. And maybe not to the magnitude that the other folks say that's happening, but it's still happening, and I'm just throwing it out there. I don't know if Kevin has any more great ideas that we could do, or good ideas, or not so good ideas, but it is still ongoing, and we cannot, at every place, just like Renee with passing on the right, we can't have a policeman stationed at every problem point. But Kevin, I don't know if you want to add to any of that, or have any suggestions or whatever. I just want these people to know that we are aware, you're doing what you can, and
Much like you said, I've been over and met with some of the complainants, sat there on the porch with them for an hour, 45 minutes, an hour. Did see one violation. It was a repeat offender. We had someone that lived there in the area. We went and had a talk with them, and don't think that's going to be a problem anymore. We've done extra patrols there. I've sat there myself in an unmarked vehicle, and where we're not sitting there for hours at a time, 15, 20 minutes, 25 minutes at a time, and we have not seen. We try to go by at the peak times that some of the complainants have said that the problems occur, and I'm not doubting what they're seeing, but we're not seeing the same things when we're there. Yeah. We try to put, as we can, extra patrols are done. We get extra patrol requests quite a bit. Different traffic safety issues, homes vacated homes, people on vacation, that we tried to check on, and we just try to do those extra patrols as much as we can.
And this would be a traffic safety concern, correct? Where if you had somebody heading west on that street and somebody that was trying to come east around our little shoulder thing.
Correct. You can go west, you can't go east on it.
And if somebody's coming west, you can't go east on it at that point in
Not
time
without
either?
going into the,
Without going into the westward bound car.
right.
I don't know what else. I was trying to think this morning driving to work. Is there another sign that we could put somewhere?
I've spoken with Ralph about, because some of the complainants had different suggestions, painting the road, doing flashing yellow lights, just a whole list of things that they wanted me to run by our Public Works Director, and neither one of us agreed that those would be viable options. And when you look at our other side streets to cut through, it's the only one that does not allow. And I think people come off the bypass, they go through the 10.5 shops, and they can see the beach access, and it doesn't make it right that they do it, but they go right around it. And I don't know that there is any more signage that can be done that's going to make it any more visible. I really don't.
Possible solution is removing the current pork chop that's there and just allowing regular east-west traffic like every other side street.
And
then you're
Yes.
back to the same problem that we had in the beginning there with the complaints that we had. I did throw out to one couple, what if we just dead end that street on the west end? That didn't sit too well.
I think you had, when we talked to the Public Works Director about that, you'd have problems with the trash trucks, the turning radius. Just looking at that, I mean, I much like the mayor just said, the other side streets between our bypass and Beach Road are two-way streets. You know, Kittleville Hills has one up by the Avalon section, but it's the only one I can think of. But that's the only one that we've got.
Yeah.
And I think it would, in my opinion, make sense that if that was remain two ways as well, and let us control traffic the way we can on the other streets on East Barnes when we get complaints. Easier to work the speeding than it is something like this, in my opinion. Yes, ma'am.
What were the problems originally? Is it because the shopping center was built next to the neighborhood and the
Mhm.
neighborhood
Yes,
was
the
upset?
increased amount of traffic, which I can certainly understand. It's that shopping center is very heavily traveled. You got two banks there and a number of shops, including Food Line, and it's a direct shot over to the Beach Road. And you also have a traffic light there on the bypass, so people accessing the area and leaving the area. So I'm sure once the shopping center was built that it did increase traffic, but I don't think it's anything more, probably significant. I would guess that it would be less than what Barnes and Bonnet, some of your other side
Yeah.
streets have.
That's what I was going to say. I'm really not seeing a difference between
No.
Barnes and Bonnet where it's just a straight shot across.
I mean, you have a traffic light at the intersection on the bypass, and to me, I think that's
a
what you
public
want people to
street.
go. You want people to go there.
Well, maybe time will fix it.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
That's all I had.
Thank you. And y'all, I mentioned briefly at our workshop the possibility of getting a resolution together to lower the speed limit coming off the bridge. When we were talking about the little bridge, I have not approached the mayor of Manio on that yet, but I will do that, and we'll hope to be able to offer a resolution on that. And what I had thrown out was perhaps 40 miles, going from 50 to 40 at that section, and then maybe continuing it across the little bridge till you get to
You're talking about from west to east?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, but not on the Manio side of the bridge?
But not on the Manio side of the bridge.
Just make sure.
But just coming to
everybody
DOT
understands
with
that,
a
yeah.
kind of a unified request. So with y'all's permission, I will bring that back for mid-month or so. Okay. We do have a request for 2 closed sessions. One is to consider possible land acquisition, which is the former Dowdy's Amusement Park. That's GS 143-318.11A5. and the second is to confer with the town attorney, GS 143-318.11A3, and I'll make that as a motion, that we enter closed session for those purposes.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, like sign. We're going to move to closed session. Ready? We're going to come back into open session. I'll ask our attorney, Mr. Leidy, to report out from our closed session.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The board did consult with the town attorney and about matters that stayed within the attorney-client privilege. It also considered the possible acquisition of the land that they went into closed session to discuss, but no actions were taken.
Any other business for us today? We are going to recess to our mid-month meeting at 7 o'clock on, I'm sorry, what date, y'all?
September 18th.
The 18th, Wednesday the 18th at 7 o'clock, right here. Thank you very much. We're in recess.